I woke to the antiseptic sting of hospital air, a sharp, sterile cold that rushed into my throat before I was fully conscious. The ceiling above me was an off-white panel lit by a fluorescent hum that vibrated in my skull like an echo I could not escape. My head felt wrapped in fire and fog, at the same time, tight pressure pulsing through my scalp as if someone were knocking from the inside, trying to get out. A low, rhythmic beep drummed beside me, steady and impersonal, reminding me with every pulse that I was alive but not entirely present. I tried to swallow, but pain flared behind my left temple and down my neck. When I shifted, something tugged at my arm, and I saw an IV taped against my skin, the tubing looping down like a lifeline I did not remember being given. I blinked against the harsh light until shapes sharpened the curtain around my bed, the metal railing, the faint movement of nurses passing in a blur of navy scrubs. I tried to speak, but only a rasp came out thin and broken. A doctor stepped forward, a man in his 40s with dark, tired eyes and a badge that read, Dr. Jameson. He spoke with a calm that felt almost unreal. "Melissa, you are awake. Do you know where you are?" I opened my mouth, but the answer slipped away. The world felt disjointed, like pieces of a puzzle someone had forced apart. I managed a whisper. "Hospital." He nodded. "You were brought to the emergency room after someone found you unconscious behind the banquet hall at Willow Terrace." My pulse kicked. Banquet hall. The words rushed through my head like wind slamming a door. Today. My brother's wedding day. A cold wave spread down my arms as the doctor leaned closer, voice steady but edged with something heavier. "You were struck in the head with a metal chair. Someone intended to knock you out." The phrase metal chair sliced through my chest. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, not from emotion, but from the effort of trying to understand a moment I could not remember. He continued, "You sustained a concussion and significant head trauma. The EMT report notes that there was dust and debris on your dress and hands, consistent with the loading dock behind the venue. Cameras show the ambulance bringing you in, but no one from the wedding party rode with you." A thin ringing filled my ears. My family. No one had come. No one had followed the gurney. No one had even stepped into the ambulance. Dr. Jameson studied my face, reading the confusion, the fear. "What is the last thing you remember?" I tried to grab at the fragments floating in my mind. A flash of silver fabric, the smell of champagne, Brandon shouting, my mother Diane grabbing my arm, adjusting my hair, whispering through clenched teeth that I would not embarrass the family on such an important day. A door slamming, a chair scraping across a floor, a gust of cold air rushing past me from the kitchen hallway, someone yelling my name, but too far away to matter. I pressed my hand to my bandaged head as the memories flickered like a dying light bulb. My brother's wedding. The morning had started with tension so thick it felt like humidity. Brandon had demanded a BMW as his wedding gift, insisting it would impress the bride's family. When I refused because it was thousands beyond what I could afford, he called me selfish, dramatic, a disappointment. And Diane had stood behind him nodding, saying that family sacrifices were expected, especially on a day when appearances mattered. My stomach twisted. The argument, the pressure, the whole family watching me as though I were the sole problem in a day full of excess and entitlement. Now I lay on a hospital bed with a concussion, and no one had bothered to check if I was alive. A police officer stepped into the curtain space, his expression firm but not unkind. "Ms. Grant, I am Officer Hale. We are investigating what happened at the venue. Can you answer a few questions?" I nodded, even though my head screamed in protest. He opened a small notebook. "You were found on the ground behind the banquet hall. No cameras cover that section. It is considered a blind spot. You were unconscious when discovered by a member of the staff. No relatives remained at the scene." I blinked hard. None of them. Not my mother, not my father, not Brandon, not even a cousin. The officer continued, "Do you recall anyone leading you toward the kitchen area or loading dock?" I searched my mind again, digging through the haze. A hand on my arm. Someone calling my name. Someone telling me to come quick. But the face was missing, erased by the impact. He lowered his voice. "Someone at your brother's wedding tried to harm you. and given the location and the blind spot, we are considering the possibility that it was planned. The room tilted slightly, or maybe I did. My breath hitched, and I gripped the blanket with weak fingers. Planned. At a wedding. At my brother's wedding. The officer studied me carefully. There were signs of a struggle. Dust on your dress. Scrapes on your hands. A metal chair left tipped over nearby. No fingerprints yet confirmed. But we will investigate everyone present. Everyone. The doctor adjusted my IV, while the officer stepped back, giving me a moment. I stared at the ceiling as fear and dread wrapped around me like a tightening band. Someone at that wedding had dragged me into a blind spot. Someone had lifted a chair and brought it down on my skull. Someone in my own family had walked away afterward, stepped over my unconscious body, and gone back to smiling for photos while I lay outside, fighting for breath. And as the memories flickered sharper and darker, one chilling truth rose above them all. Someone at my brother's wedding tried to kill me, and someone in my family helped cover it up. The memories did not return in one clean line, but in scattered flashes that stung like the flicker of a broken light bulb. As I lay in the hospital bed with the room humming around me, the edges of my vision softening and sharpening in inconsistent waves, I felt as though someone had taken the last 24 hours of my life and torn them into jagged pieces. Every time I reached for one, another slipped away. The first image that steadied itself long enough for me to hold on to was Brandon's voice rising above the chatter in the dressing suite earlier that day. The anger in it was sharp and entitled a tone I had known since childhood, but still dreaded. He had cornered me near the garment rack filled with his groomsmen's suits, the scent of cologne and pressed fabric thick in the air, and demanded to know why I was refusing to buy him the BMW he wanted for his wedding. I remembered the heat of embarrassment crawling up my neck as two groomsmen pretended not to listen while adjusting their ties. Brandon had leaned in close, his breath heavy with the champagne he had been drinking since morning, and said that I was ruining the biggest day of his life on purpose, that I had always been jealous, that I needed to prove I was part of the family by stepping up. I remembered swallowing hard, feeling my throat tighten as I repeated that I could not afford a luxury car for him, that I was barely managing my own bills, that asking me for something like that was unfair. But fairness had never mattered to Brandon. The next memory rose like a fog creeping under a door. My mother Diane pulling me aside moments later, gripping my shoulders and adjusting my collar like I was a doll she needed to pose correctly for a photograph. She hissed under her breath that I should not make a scene, that appearances mattered more than whatever disagreement I and Brandon were having. She insisted that families with class resolve issues quietly and that I needed to fix things before the ceremony began. I remembered the sting of her nails digging into my skin, not from pain, but from the pressure of expectation. She cared only about how we looked to the bride's wealthy relatives. She did not care that her son had demanded something impossible. The hospital room around me blurred as my mind drifted back into the venue. The mirrored hallway lined with white roses, the chatter of relatives arriving in clusters, the sound of high heels clicking against polished marble. I remembered standing near the guest book table and feeling the weight of every stare as whispers floated around me like smoke. Several aunts murmured that Brandon was devastated I had refused to support him. An uncle asked me loudly in front of others why I would choose today of all days to be difficult. Their words wrapped around me like a tightening rope, drawing all air from my lungs. I remembered gripping the edge of the table to steady myself, forcing a polite smile, even as nausea rolled through me. A faint buzz of laughter flickered in another corner of my mind. Brandon's friends toasting to his new life while shooting me looks that said I was the villain of the day. Diane circling the room with her perfect posture and bright smile, whispering to guests that I was having one of my moods, but that everything was fine. Everything needed to look fine. That phrase echoed in my memory, haunting and repetitive. I remembered trying to slip away for air, my hands trembling as I pushed open a side door that led toward the catering hallway. The scent of roasting chicken and warm bread drifted toward me. I leaned against the wall, trying to breathe, trying to recenter myself before returning to the curated chaos of the wedding. The memory warped again, shifting into something sharper. My father, Edward, crossing the hall without looking at me, his eyes fixed on the ground like he wanted to avoid choosing sides. He muttered a quiet reminder that the day was not about me, that I should not cause tension that families sacrifice. It was always that phrase, families sacrifice. But somehow, it was always me doing the sacrificing. The next flash came with a physical jolt that made me tense on the hospital bed. Someone tugging my wrist, a voice calling my name. Melissa, come here for a second. Urgent but not panicked. Familiar but muffled. I tried to see the face in my mind, but it was blurred like a figure standing behind frosted glass. I remembered hesitating. I remembered a cold rush of air as a nearby door opened. I remembered stepping into the darker hallway near the kitchen away from the music and the lights. I remembered thinking it would be quick, that someone needed something from me, that I would return before anyone noticed I had been gone. A faint metallic scrape echoed in the back of my mind. A chair leg dragging, a sharp inhale, a shadow moving faster than I could interpret. The memory snapped away just before the impact, leaving me with a chill that climbed up my spine. My heartbeat in the hospital room quickened, syncing with the monitor beside me. The doctor's voice grew distant as another memory forced itself forward. Diane's face that morning, flawless makeup, stiff smile eyes filled with something darker beneath the surface. She had pulled Brandon's jacket straight and told him not to worry about anything, that she would handle it, that no one would embarrass their family today. The word handle burrowed under my skin. Had she meant me? Had she told someone to get me out of the way? The images were jagged and incomplete, like shards of a broken mirror, but each fragment cut deeper than the last. One thing became painfully clear as the memories continued stitching themselves together. Whatever happened behind that banquet hall did not happen by accident. Someone had led me there. Someone had waited for me. Someone had made sure there were no cameras. And someone I knew had swung that chair. For as long as I can remember, the Grant family did not exist as a group of people, but as a performance. A carefully rehearsed tableau meant to be admired from a distance and never examined up close. The pressure began long before Brandon and I were adults, long before wedding venues and luxury cars and threats disguised as family expectations. It started with my mother Diane, the undisputed director of our family's never-ending public relations campaign. Diane lived her life through the eyes of other people. She judged every movement, every choice, every breath through the imagined reactions of neighbors, relatives, coworkers, and even total strangers who happened to glance in our direction. She used to stand in front of the living room window for hours adjusting the curtains, making sure the angle was perfect, because she said people walking their dogs might form opinions about us based on the way light reflected off our blinds. It sounded absurd even when I was 8, but in Diane's world, perception was reality, and reality had no power unless it was attractive enough to be envied. She made sure our yard was trimmed to exact measurements every week, not because she cared for landscaping, but because she believed uncut grass was a sign of moral weakness. She once made my father Edward repaint the garage door 3 times in one afternoon because the shade of white was not crisp enough to impress the neighbors across the street. This obsession with image was not a phase or a habit. It was the air she breathed and demanded the rest of us inhale. Growing up in that house meant performing on a stage where the lights were always too bright and the expectations never softened. Brandon, being the youngest and the only son, became Diane's prized exhibit. She dressed him in the most expensive clothes even when we could not afford them. She forced him into soccer, piano, and debate team, not because he enjoyed any of it, but because it made him look well-rounded. If he ever complained, she smoothed his hair and whispered that greatness required sacrifice, though the sacrifice usually came from someone else. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the daughter who learned early that the easiest path through the Grant household was the one where I made myself small. Diane scrutinized me endlessly. My posture, my voice, my laugh, my hair. She told me to speak softly because loud girls looked desperate. She told me to eat slowly because fast eaters appeared greedy. She told me never to cry in public because tears were embarrassing. Every emotion had to be curated to her standards. When I brought home good grades, she said that was expected and no reason to get a big head. When Brandon brought home average grades, she framed them on the refrigerator and said boys matured later. I grew up watching her celebrate his mediocrity while dismissing my accomplishments, and though it hurt, I learned to adapt because adaptation was the only way to survive. As we grew older, Diane's obsession only strengthened. Edward, who loved his routine and despised conflict, learned to stay silent. He drifted behind Diane like a shadow supporting her demands because resisting them meant days of icy tension and slammed doors. He did what she asked because it was easier, and over time the habit hardened into a pattern he never broke. Diane controlled everything from the clothes we wore to the tone of our greetings when guests arrived. She insisted we rehearse family introductions before every holiday gathering so no one stumbled over their words. She instructed us on which jokes made us look wholesome and which made us look unstable. She demanded that any disagreement be buried so deep that even we pretended it had never existed. When Brandon punched a hole in the wall during high school, Diane hung a framed photo over it and told us to never mention it again. She said imperfections were acceptable only if they were invisible. Her behavior was not occasional, it was the daily rhythm of our lives. While other families dealt with chores or carpool schedules, ours revolved around presentation. Diane always said, "People judge you by how your family looks, Melissa," and she meant it literally. Not just clothing or hairstyles, but behavior roles, hierarchy, even the way we smiled. She needed everything polished and symmetrical. She needed a perfect son and a perfectly quiet daughter. The cracks in this illusion were visible to me long before anyone else acknowledged them. Diane's insistence on perfection created a pressure cooker inside our home, and Brandon quickly learned that he did not need to behave. He could scream, break things, lie, and manipulate, and Diane would smooth it over because acknowledging his faults would tarnish the image she worshipped. When he stole money from my wallet in high school, she said, "Boys make mistakes." When he crashed her car at 17, she said someone must have distracted him. When he shoved me against a door during an argument, she said I must have provoked him. Her entire identity depended on her ability to pretend our family functioned flawlessly, and any challenge to that illusion was treated as betrayal. Even in adulthood, the performance continued. Diane curated her Facebook page like she was managing a celebrity account. Every post was a staged photo of Brandon smiling or Edward grilling or the entire family pretending to enjoy a holiday that had actually been filled with icy silence. She never posted about me unless she needed the appearance of unity, and even then she chose the least personal photos so no one would look too closely. This obsession with appearances shaped every event we attended, every gathering we hosted, and every moment we breathed around her. Which is why, on the morning of Brandon's wedding, she had moved through the venue with the urgency of someone preparing for a televised event instead of a family celebration. She barked orders at the planners' adjusted floral arrangements and reprimanded hotel staff for fingerprints on the ballroom doors. She did not hug me or ask how I was. She simply pulled a lint roller across my sleeve, tightened my ponytail, and said, "Do not embarrass us today." Those were her first words to me on my brother's wedding day. Not good morning. Not thank you for helping. Just a warning that my very existence threatened her carefully crafted image. And somewhere in the haze of memories pressing on my skull in that hospital bed, I realized Diane had not been behaving differently that day. She had been behaving exactly the same way she always had. She was consistent, predictable, obsessed, image above all else, even above me, even above my safety. And if keeping the family perfect required removing me from sight, I knew, without question, she would have done it. The call from Mrs. Rowley came late in the afternoon after a nurse stepped into my room and said a woman named Linda Rowley had been trying to reach me repeatedly since morning. I stared at the phone for several seconds before answering, unsure whether I had the strength to handle another reminder of the life I had been dragged away from. When I finally pressed the phone to my ear, her familiar voice hit me like a warm but unsettling gust of air. "Melissa, dear, I heard what happened at the wedding. I have been worried sick." Her voice trembled in a way that made my stomach tighten. She had been our next-door neighbor for almost 20 years and had watched Brandon and me grow up from the front porch of her small tan house with the red shutters. She had known us before the Grant family performance became suffocating before Diane turned every backyard barbecue or neighborhood block party into an opportunity to prove we were better than we actually were. I tried to speak, but my throat felt stiff and sore. "Mrs. Rowley," I managed. "I am fine." She exhaled slowly, a sound mixed with relief and dread. "The police came by this morning asking questions," she said. "They wanted to know if I had ever seen anything concerning involving your family. And I told them the truth. Every word of it." I closed my eyes. A wave of nausea rolled through me and settled in my chest. "What truth?" She hesitated long enough for my pulse to accelerate. "Honey, you know I never wanted to get involved in your family's business. Your mother made it very clear that outsiders were not welcome to comment on anything. But the officers said someone tried to hurt you, and I could not stay quiet about what I saw over the years." My breath caught. She continued, her voice steadier now that she had committed to the conversation. "I told them about the day Brandon threw that garbage can at you when you were 22. The memory struck me like a cold slap. I had tried to bury it for years, but it rose instantly. I could see the cracked driveway, the humid Michigan summer air, the overflowing trash bin Brandon kicked over after screaming at me over something trivial, probably a missing set of keys or a chore he believed I had done incorrectly. He had lifted the plastic bin and hurled it at me with enough force to knock me off balance and send garbage spilling across the pavement. Diane had been inside. Edward had been mowing the lawn. Yet neither of them came out. Only Mrs. Rowley saw, and she had rushed across the driveway with a dish towel in her hand, yelling at Brandon to stop. He responded by swearing at her and slamming the back door so hard it cracked the frame. Diane later told me that I had exaggerated the moment and that boys sometimes get frustrated. Hearing the truth spoken aloud now tightened something deep in my chest. Mrs. Rowley went on. "I also told them about the night he got arrested outside Harlow's bar the first time. And the second time. And the third. 3 fights in 1 year. Your mother begged me not to tell anyone. She said it would ruin Brandon's chances of getting into a good job and that gossip spreads faster in small towns." I remembered those nights too, though Diane had insisted everyone pretend they never happened. She had scrubbed every mention of them from family conversations and holiday gatherings. She even told relatives that Brandon had been taking night classes on the evenings he was actually sitting in a holding cell. The way she twisted reality had always made me question my own memory, but hearing Mrs. Rowley recount it so plainly made everything clearer than it had ever been. "There was more," she said quietly. "I heard him yelling at you last week. I was in my garden trimming the hydrangeas and I heard something crash inside your house." I froze. I had dismissed that sound as me dropping a box while cleaning. But now the truth filtered back in. Brandon had stormed into my place, demanding to know whether I had reconsidered the BMW. When I told him no, he slammed a photo frame off the wall. I tried to back away, but he stepped closer, chest heaving, calling me selfish, telling me the family depended on him to make a good impression. I had managed to push him out the front door and lock it behind him, but my hands had been shaking for an hour afterward. I had told myself not to overreact, that he was just stressed that he would calm down. Diane had trained me to shrink every threat until it seemed harmless. But it had never been harmless. "Honey," Mrs. Rowley said, lowering her voice as if someone might overhear her from across the hospital. "Brandon has been dangerous for years. Your mother covered it up because she cared more about how things looked than about how anyone felt. And your father went along with it because he cannot stand up to her." I swallowed hard, feeling the heat of tears behind my eyes. She was not telling me anything I did not already know deep down, but hearing someone else finally say it made my chest ache. I asked, "Did the police seem surprised?" "Not surprised," she answered. "Concerned. They said the way your injuries line up suggests someone swung at you with a lot of force. Not an accident, not a stumble. Someone hit you, Melissa. Hard." The words sat between us, heavy and undeniable. I felt cold despite the warm blanket covering me. She continued softly. "They asked me if I thought Brandon would ever hurt you on purpose. I told them yes. Not because I want trouble for him, but because I have seen him lose control. I have seen how he looks when he does not get what he wants. I never understood why your mother allowed it." My throat tightened. She did not allow it. She encouraged it. Mrs. Rowley sighed. I know. She always cared more about image than honesty. There was a pause long enough that I heard the steady beep of my heart monitor through the phone. Listen, she said. Whatever happened at that wedding, it did not come out of nowhere. Someone led you into that hallway. Someone knew the cameras did not reach that blind spot. And someone took years of anger and entitlement and finally acted on it. I closed my eyes again. The memories of Brandon's rage, Diane's excuses, Edward's silence, each piece now forming a clearer picture. This was not a random attack. It was a pattern finally exploding. Before she hung up, Mrs. Rowley said the words that would echo through me for the rest of the day. The truth always comes out, Melissa. And sometimes it takes a tragedy for people to finally see what was right in front of them. When the call ended, I stared at the wall in silence, the past pressing against me like weight on my chest. Brandon had not become violent overnight. He had been violent for years. And for years, my family had decided that protecting the Grant image mattered more than protecting me. The fight over the BMW did not begin on the wedding day itself. It started months earlier, simmering beneath the surface like a pot left on a burner too long, slowly boiling into something dangerous and inevitable. I remember the first time Brandon mentioned it. He had come over unannounced, letting himself into my house without knocking something he had done his entire life because Diane convinced us both that siblings should not need boundaries. He walked through my living room with a confidence that made it feel like he owned the place, dropping onto my couch and scrolling through his phone while tossing out remarks about wedding themes and honeymoon packages. Then, casually, without looking up, he said he had found the perfect wedding gift for himself. A brand new BMW 7 Series. I stared at him thinking he was joking. But Brandon rarely joked unless it made him look charming, and this was not one of those moments. He explained that the groom arriving in a luxury car symbolized success and good fortune, and that Lindsay's family expected something impressive. He added that their relatives were used to a certain lifestyle, and he did not want them to think our family was cheap or unprepared. I asked him who was buying the BMW, still hoping I had misunderstood. He looked at me like the answer should have been obvious. You are, he said simply. You have a stable job. You do not have kids. You owe it to the family to step up. I felt my pulse spike. I reminded him that I worked in medical admin support, not a six-figure career that allowed for lavish gifts. I told him calmly that a car worth tens of thousands of dollars was not something I could contribute. Brandon dismissed my concerns as if they were excuses. He leaned back on the couch, propped his feet on my coffee table, and told me that sacrificing for family was expected especially for a big life event like a wedding. The arrogance in his tone was familiar, but the entitlement felt heavier than ever. When I repeated my refusal, he stood abruptly pacing my living room with restless energy. He accused me of wanting him to look bad, of wanting his new in-laws to judge him. He said I always had a problem with him being the center of attention, and that if I truly loved him, I would make this one gesture that would change how people saw our entire family. I told him buying a luxury car was not a gesture. It was financial destruction. He scoffed and left my house without saying goodbye. Weeks passed, and I hoped the issue had died. But Brandon brought it up again during a Sunday dinner at Diane and Edward's house. We sat at the long oak table that Diane decorated like we were hosting a magazine shoot complete with candles that no one was allowed to light and napkins folded into precise shapes she learned from an online tutorial. Brandon announced to the table that he had found the exact BMW model he wanted and that he needed to finalize the purchase soon. Diane smiled widely, proud and excited, and turned to me with an expectant look. When I said I could not do it, Diane's expression hardened into something cold and sharp. She told me that Brandon was entering a new chapter in life, and that the least I could do was support him after everything our family had done for me. I wanted to ask her what exactly the family had done for me besides criticize, control, and silence me. But the words stayed trapped in my chest. Edward cleared his throat and muttered that families make sacrifices. I felt the familiar wave of resignation washing over me, the part of me that had been trained for years to bend rather than break. But this time, something inside me resisted. I stood my ground. I said no again. For the first time in a long time, I said no loudly enough for everyone to hear. Brandon slammed his hand on the table, rattling Diane's silverware collection. He accused me of sabotaging his future. He said Lindsay's family would think he was poor and that it would be my fault. The rest of the dinner spiraled into a lecture about loyalty image and obligation. Diane even suggested I take out a loan if money was the issue. She said real families helped each other no matter the cost. I responded that real families did not demand financial ruin for vanity. But Diane ignored the statement entirely, acting as though I had not spoken. The conversation ended with Brandon storming out Diane, following him with frantic steps, and Edward sitting in silence, avoiding my eyes. I drove home that night, gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles ached. The absurdity of the situation pressed against me like weight on my chest. I owed no one a BMW. I owed no one a performance. For the first time, I allowed myself to question everything. The months leading up to the wedding were tense and thick with unspoken pressure. Brandon and Diane kept circling back to the topic each time with more aggression. They said the family reputation was at stake. They said Lindsay's parents were expecting something impressive. They said my refusal made us look small and unprepared. Diane reminded me repeatedly that I had embarrassed the family before, and that this was my chance to make it right. Make it right, as though my financial independence was a sin needing repentance. In the days before the wedding, Brandon sent me screenshots of BMW listings complete with highlighted features and payment breakdowns he expected me to consider. When I ignored those messages, he left voicemails telling me he could not believe I was choosing to fail him. Diane texted me instructions on how to smile at the wedding, how to dress, and how to speak to relatives I had not seen in years. Her obsession with appearance reached a fever pitch, and her desperation to appear perfect to Lindsay's wealthy family made her more demanding than ever. By the time the wedding morning arrived, the BMW argument had become the fault line of our family, a crack that revealed every resentment, every denial, every buried truth Diane had forced us to hide. And Brandon, fueled by entitlement and Diane's endless affirmations, decided that if I would not give him what he wanted, I would become the villain responsible for ruining everything he believed he deserved. The BMW was not just a car. It was a symbol of the fantasy Diane built and the shrine Brandon expected us all to worship. My refusal shattered their illusion, and for people like them, losing control over the illusion was unforgivable. The morning of Brandon's wedding felt less like a family celebration and more like reporting for duty at an event where I was expected to serve rather than belong. I woke before dawn, my head still heavy from the week of tension that seemed to coil itself around my neck like a tightening rope. The venue was an expansive estate with manicured gardens, a ballroom lit by crystal chandeliers, and a bridal suite designed to look like something out of a luxury magazine. As I drove into the parking lot, I saw Diane standing outside, directing staff members as if she were the event coordinator rather than the mother of the groom. She wore a blush-colored dress that matched the bridal palette, and a smile stretched so wide it almost looked painful. When she spotted my car, her smile flickered for a moment and then reappeared, brittle and forced. "Melissa," she said sharply, glancing at her watch, "you are nearly 7 minutes behind schedule. This is a wedding, not a casual barbecue." I stepped out of the car and tried to greet her calmly, but she was already circling me like a stylist preparing a client for a photo shoot. She straightened my dress, smoothed my hair, brushed non-existent dust off my sleeves, and whispered that Lindsay's family had already arrived and that I needed to behave. By behave, she meant stand still, speak softly, and stay completely out of the way unless summoned. The ceremony was still hours away, yet the air inside the venue felt thick with expectation. I could hear the soft buzz of blow dryers in the bridal suite, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the muffled chatter of bridesmaids who seemed excited in a carefree way that made me painfully aware of my own tension. Diane pulled me toward the entrance hall where guests would eventually trickle in. "I need you to stand here," she said, gesturing to the polished floor beside the guest book table. "Smile politely, greet people, direct them inside. Do not wander. Do not look lost. Do not mention anything about the BMW." Her voice sharpened on the last sentence, as if the subject itself was radioactive. I opened my mouth to remind her that I was a guest, not staff, but she cut me off with a warning look. People notice everything, Melissa. They notice if a family member looks stressed. They notice if someone is not pulling their weight. Today is important, and I will not have you making us look chaotic. With that, she walked away, leaving me stationed like a decorative statue. For the next hour, I stood at the entrance as guests began arriving in pairs and groups dressed in their best clothes, carrying large boxes wrapped in silver paper or envelopes with calligraphy lettering. They smiled at me politely, but several eyes flicked over me with hints of recognition, the kind that said they had heard something. A few relatives whispered as they approached. One aunt leaned in close, squeezed my arm, and said, "I know things are tense, dear, but it is Brandon's special day. Maybe you can let certain things go for now." Another guest asked loudly why I had refused to get him the BMW after all the sacrifices the family made for me. She said it with a disapproving pout, as if repeating a rumor she assumed was true. I felt heat rising under my skin and fought the urge to walk away. Diane floated around the room like a hostess at a political gala, smiling widely at every wealthy guest and correcting staff members who moved a candle or flower vase half an inch out of place. Every so often, she glanced toward me with a sharp look scanning for flaws. She did not see a daughter. She saw a liability, something to be micromanaged into invisibility. The worst moment came when the bride's parents arrived. They stepped out of their black luxury car in tailored outfits and a quiet air of wealth. Diane rushed toward them with the urgency of someone approaching royalty, clasping their hands and thanking them for coming. She waved me over with a stiff gesture. "Melissa, come greet the Harpers." I walked toward them, rehearsing the polite lines Diane drilled into me that morning. But before I could speak, Mrs. Harper asked, with a thin smile, whether I was Brandon's sister. When I confirmed, she said, "Oh, yes, we heard you have been under a lot of stress about the car situation." I froze. Diane's eyes shot daggers at me silently, commanding me to respond in a way that protected her narrative. I forced a polite smile and said simply that weddings could be overwhelming for everyone. Mrs. Harper nodded in that distant way people do when they sense something messy beneath the surface. Diane quickly steered the conversation elsewhere, praising the family's taste and mentioning how honored we were to merge families. Her voice dripped with curated sweetness that made my chest tighten. After the Harpers moved inside, Diane turned on me with a look so sharp it felt like a slap. "Could you try not to look tense?" she hissed. "You are making us appear unstable." I nearly choked on the irony. I excused myself to the restroom just to breathe, but found Diane already inside, fixing her makeup in the mirror. She inspected her reflection like each eyelash was a matter of public reputation. She did not turn her head when she said, "Brandon is upset. You know that. He thinks you are sabotaging his future." I blinked. "I am not sabotaging anything." Diane finally looked at me, eyes cold and unwavering. "You embarrassed him. And now everyone is talking. You could have made this simple." I wanted to ask how buying a car worth more than my yearly income was simple. I wanted to ask why my feelings never mattered, but there was no point. She was unreachable, sealed inside her obsession with perfection. When I returned to the entrance hall, more guests had arrived and I resumed the role she assigned me. Several people asked if I was handling logistics for the wedding. One woman mistook me for staff and handed me her coat. I nearly corrected her, but the humiliation weighed too heavily on my tongue. I accepted it silently and hung it on a rack. The ceremony approached and the wedding planner rushed by with a clipboard, but every time she needed something moved or someone directed, she looked toward me because I was already standing in the position where employees usually stationed themselves. Diane watched approvingly from across the room. She had succeeded in turning me into unpaid labor. At one point, Brandon walked past me wearing his tailored suit and polished shoes, phone pressed to his ear, barking orders at someone. He paused long enough to glare at me with a look full of resentment, as if I were personally responsible for every frustration in his life. He muttered something under his breath that sounded like unbelievable before storming off. The music began as guests started taking their seats for the ceremony. I attempted to slip into the ballroom, hoping to sit quietly in the back, but Diane intercepted me, placing a firm hand on my arm. "I need you to wait in the hall until all the guests are seated," she said. Then, she added, "Do not interact with Lindsay's family unless spoken to. They are already asking questions." My chest tightened. I felt like a problem she needed to hide until the perfect moment when my presence could be managed and controlled. When the doors finally closed and everyone settled inside, I stood alone in the hallway, staring at my reflection in the glass frame of a decorative sign that read, "Welcome to the Harper Grant Wedding." The irony stung. I was a Grant in name only. Every action, every breath that morning had served only one purpose: to maintain Diane's facade and to shield Brandon from consequences of his own entitlement. I had been assigned the role of a servant because it was easier for them if I remained useful but invisible. And as I stood there, the muffled sound of the ceremony echoing behind the closed doors, a quiet realization formed in my mind. This was not just a wedding. This was the culmination of years of being diminished. Years of being told my worth depended on my compliance. Years of being molded into a convenient background character in my own family. The BMW argument had been the spark, but the fire had been burning long before that. And on this day, under the weight of expectations and whispered judgments, something inside me began to shift. I was no longer willing to shrink. I was no longer willing to serve. And I had no idea that only hours later that refusal would cost me consciousness, safety, and nearly my life. The moment the ceremony ended and the guests spilled back into the hall for photos and cocktails, I felt the tension in the air sharpen like a blade pressed against skin. I tried to slip past the crowd unnoticed, hoping to find a quiet corner to breathe, but Brandon spotted me almost immediately. His face was flushed from champagne and adrenaline, and the strained smile he had worn for pictures cracked the second he saw me. He marched toward me with stiff shoulders and clenched fists, grabbing my wrist with a force that startled me. "Come with me," he muttered through gritted teeth, dragging me down the hallway before I could protest. He pulled me into the changing room behind the groom's suite, a space cluttered with garment bags, cologne bottles, and half-empty glasses left behind by his groomsmen. The door slammed shut behind us, the sound echoing off the tiled floor. The moment the lock clicked, Brandon turned on me as if I were an enemy soldier instead of his sister. "What is your problem, Melissa?" His voice cracked like a whip. "You spent the entire day acting like some martyr and making everyone feel awkward." I stared at him, stunned. "I stood at the entrance for hours 'cause you and Mom told me to." Brandon let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, please, do not pretend you are the victim here. You made everything harder than it needed to be. You had one job, one, and you could not even do that without turning it into drama." My chest tightened. "Are you talking about the car again?" He stepped closer, the heat of his anger radiating off him. "Yes, the car. The car you refused to buy. The car that showed Lindsay's family exactly how little support I get from you. They are all judging me because of you." I blinked in disbelief. "I told you months ago that I could not afford it. It was never an option." Brandon shook his head violently. "You are lying. You had the money. You just did not want me to have it." He was pacing now, gesturing wildly, knocking over a bottle of cologne without noticing. The scent filled the room, sharp and overwhelming. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Brandon, stop. You are drunk. We can talk later." He spun around so fast, I flinched. "Do not tell me what to do. You embarrassed me. Mom is furious. She said you ruined the entire morning." My heart thudded loudly in my ears. "Diane said that." Brandon scoffed again. "Of course she did. She told me you were being difficult on purpose. She said you refused to cooperate. She said you were drawing attention to yourself." Something inside me cracked. I had done everything Diane asked. I had stood still like a piece of decor. I had accepted coat check duties. I had smiled through humiliation after humiliation. And somehow that was still not enough. Brandon's voice rose. "You should have been honored to contribute to my future. Instead, you made me look like a fool." I felt something stronger than fear stir inside me, something that had been buried under years of obedience. It surfaced with clarity and weight. I said no. The room went silent for a beat. Brandon's eyes widened as if the word itself was a slap. "What did you say?" I straightened my posture. I said no. I am not your bank. I am not your maid. And I am done being treated like the family scapegoat. Brandon stepped toward me, chest heaving. You think you are better than us. You think you deserve more respect than Mom and Dad. You think you can just walk away from responsibilities. His face twisted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. You owe us. My voice trembled but did not break. I owe you nothing. The temperature in the room shifted instantly. Brandon's jaw tightened. He grabbed a chair, slamming it back into place as if restraining the urge to throw it. The sound reverberated through the room, making my pulse spike. You have been ungrateful your entire life, he snarled. All Mom ever asked was that you show loyalty. But no, you always have to make things about you. I felt my hands shaking, but I held my ground. Mom only cares about image. She does not care about you. She does not care about me. She cares about how we look to strangers. Brandon lunged forward, pointing a trembling finger in my face. Do not talk about Mom like that. You are the one who makes her life harder. You are the one who ruins everything. His voice cracked. She bends over backward for you. Every time something goes wrong, she defends you. My breath caught in my throat. That was not how I remembered anything. I remembered being the one blamed, ignored, corrected, minimized. I remembered Diane whispering into Brandon's ear that he was destined for greatness while telling me not to outshine him. Brandon's version of reality was so warped it made my skin crawl. I said quietly, "She protects you from consequences. Not me. Never me." Brandon stared as though I had spoken a foreign language. For a moment, the look in his eyes shifted from rage to something like confusion, but it vanished instantly, consumed by something darker. You just cannot stand that today is not about you. I felt my throat tighten. This has never been about me. It has always been about you. That was the final spark. Brandon grabbed the garment rack and shoved it aside, the wheels screeching across the floor. He stepped so close I could feel his breath on my face. I swear, Melissa, if you ruin one more thing today, I will. His voice faltered not from remorse but from fury so intense he could not form the threat cleanly. Through the door, I heard footsteps passing by, and suddenly, Diane's voice filtered in, sharp and anxious. Brandon, keep your voice down. Guests can hear you. She did not knock. She did not ask if we were all right. She simply protected her image through the door, guarding the performance as always. That was the moment something inside me hardened. I lifted my chin and met Brandon's glare. I am not afraid of you anymore. For a second, pure shock flickered in his eyes. Then his expression twisted into something venomous. You will be. He shoved past me and stormed out of the room, leaving the door swinging behind him. I stood alone among scattered clothes and broken silence, my heart pounding as realization washed over me. The argument was not just a disagreement, it was a warning, and I should have recognized it as the moment the ground beneath my feet began to crack. The hallway outside the changing room felt colder than it should have, as if the temperature dropped the second Brandon stormed away. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the partially open door he left swinging behind him, my pulse still racing from the argument. The muffled music drifting from the ballroom only amplified the sense of isolation wrapping around me. Laughter echoed somewhere down the corridor, bright and careless, clashing violently with the heaviness sitting inside my chest. I took a slow breath and stepped out, my hands trembling as I smoothed the fabric of my dress. I needed a moment alone, somewhere quiet, somewhere untouched by Diane's scrutiny or Brandon's rage. The hallway was lined with framed photographs of past weddings held at the venue, each picture a curated moment of joy. Couples laughing, families embracing, guests smiling for cameras. The images felt mocking, like reminders of how far my reality was from anything meant to be beautiful. I walked slowly, my heels clicking softly against the polished floor. As I reached the intersection where the hallway branched toward the kitchen, I sensed movement. It was subtle at first, like a shadow shifting out of place. I paused, expecting to see a staff member carrying trays or adjusting decor, but the corridor ahead remained empty. The faint hum of refrigeration units drifted from the kitchen, and warm air carrying the scent of roasted vegetables seeped from the swinging doors. I took a step forward, then another, each one echoing louder than the last. That was when I saw it. A figure standing at the far end of the hallway, half obscured by the dim light and the decorative arch that separated the private service area from the guest-accessible space. The silhouette was still too still, as if whoever it was had been standing there longer than I realized. I froze instantly, my heartbeat thudding loud enough that I wondered if it carried through the air. The figure did not move. Its posture suggested someone watching, not passing by. My first instinct was to assume it was Brandon, fueled by lingering rage and looking for another confrontation. But something in the shape and stance made me hesitate. The shoulders appeared broader, the outline taller. My father. The thought slid into my mind uninvited. Edward often carried himself with a slumped, defeated posture, but when he stood still unmoving, he had the solid frame of someone who chose silence over presence. I squinted, trying to make out more detail. The figure shifted slightly, a barely perceptible lean, as if adjusting weight to one foot. My breath caught in my throat. Whoever it was, they were not just passing through. They were watching me. The corridor lights flickered overhead, momentarily dimming the space before brightening again. When the light returned, the figure had stepped backward, retreating into the darker portion of the hall. Not turning, not walking away, just fading deeper into the shadow. For a moment, I wondered if my concussion was distorting my perception, if the argument with Brandon had heightened my senses to the point of paranoia. But something inside me, some instinct honed over years of navigating a volatile household, told me the figure had been real. I swallowed hard and forced my legs to move not toward the figure, but toward the safer, brighter area closer to the dining room. Guests chatted loudly near the cocktail bar, oblivious to the tension coiling in my spine. I reached the edge of the crowd and stood there for a moment, trying to anchor myself. A waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes brushed past me, murmuring a quick apology. A pair of cousins waved half-heartedly before turning back to their conversation. No one seemed to notice the tremor in my hands or the pallor in my face. I needed air, real air. Without thinking, I moved toward the side exit that led to the small outdoor patio behind the ballroom. The night air was cooler than I expected, carrying the faint scent of pine from the landscaped trees. I leaned against the railing and closed my eyes, letting the wind brush against my face. But even in the fresh air, the image of the silhouette lingered. Who had been standing there, and why had they been watching me? My mind replayed every possible scenario. Brandon still seething and unwilling to let go of the fight. Diane checking whether I was doing something that could tarnish her perfect day. Edward pacing in silence like he did whenever tension grew too loud to ignore. A stranger, though, that felt least likely. A staff member, though, their uniforms were usually bright enough to catch the light. The longer I thought, the more unsettling it became. The way the figure retreated instead of approaching. The way they stayed silent. The way it felt intentional. I stayed outside until the cold began to sting the skin of my arms, then returned inside reluctantly. The hallway where I had seen the figure was empty, now lit normally calm, sterile. But something about the lingering air felt charged, as if the walls had absorbed the tension. I walked slowly past the spot where the silhouette had stood. There were faint footprints on the polished floor, but they were smudged from multiple people walking through the area. Nothing distinct, nothing useful. I continued walking, repeating to myself that it was nothing, just exhaustion, stress, and the overwhelming weight of the wedding. But deep down, I knew better. I found myself wandering toward the back of the venue again, not because I wanted to return to that frightening moment, but because I sensed something unfinished. The staff hallway was narrower than the guest corridors, with exposed pipes along the upper wall and a faint smell of cleaning supplies. The air felt heavier here, thicker, warmer. I reached the doorway leading to the loading dock, but hesitated. The door was propped open slightly, letting in a sliver of cool, outdoor air. I stared at the gap, my pulse picking up. My instincts screamed that something was wrong. I turned sharply when a sound echoed from behind me, not loud, but sudden enough to feel jarring. A slow, metallic scrape. like the leg of a chair dragging across the floor. My breath hitched. I spun toward the source of the noise, muscles tense, eyes scanning the shadows. But before my gaze adjusted fully, the sound stopped. The hallway fell silent again. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I took a step backward, then another, not willing to turn my back on the direction the noise had come from. That was when I saw movement again. A different angle this time. A flash of motion behind the slightly ajar door to the storage area that connected to the kitchen. Not enough to identify a face, but enough to confirm someone was there. Watching. Waiting. I whispered hello, though my voice barely rose above a breath. No response. I should have walked away. I should have sought out another guest, a staff member, anyone. But curiosity mixed with dread pulled me forward. I reached out and nudged the door open another inch. The room behind it was dim, the only light coming from a small fixture near the shelf stocked with linens and catering trays. I took another breath and leaned in slightly. The instant I did, a footstep echoed from somewhere deeper in the room. A slow, deliberate step, followed by silence. A chill ran through my body so quickly I felt my knees weaken. Whoever was inside had not expected me to come closer, and their hesitation confirmed the worst truth. They were not there by accident. I stepped back quickly and let the door fall shut. This time I did not linger. I turned and walked straight toward the busier area of the venue, refusing to look back even once. As I blended into the crowd again, trying to steady my breathing, I felt an unsettling certainty settle heavy in my chest. Someone had been watching me. Someone who knew the darker corners of the venue. Someone who had a reason to stay hidden. And I did not know it yet, but that shadowed presence was not just a momentary unease. It was the first warning of what was coming, the first hint that someone had already chosen me as their target long before the chair came down on my skull. The next morning in the hospital, long before the headache medication had fully dulled the throbbing behind my eyes, 2 police officers returned to my room carrying a tablet, a manila folder and expressions that told me whatever they had discovered was far from simple. Officer Hale introduced the other man as Detective Saunders from the County Investigations Unit. He was older, broad-shouldered with the kind of steady gaze that suggested he had seen enough chaos in his career to recognize it instantly. They asked if I felt well enough to review some information. I nodded, even though the room still tilted slightly whenever I moved too fast. Detective Saunders set the tablet on the rolling tray beside my bed and tapped the screen. A grainy video began to play, and at first, all I saw was the elegant entrance of the banquet hall, the polished marble floors reflecting the glow of chandeliers. Guests walked in and out of view, some laughing, some holding drinks, some taking pictures. The detective said they had obtained surveillance footage from the venue, and that while parts of it were helpful, other parts presented serious challenges. He scrubbed through several clips until reaching one that showed me standing near the guest book earlier that day, offering restrained greetings to each person entering. I looked stiff and uncomfortable, the forced smile doing nothing to hide the exhaustion in my eyes. The footage shifted to another angle, showing the main lobby leading toward the cocktail area. It captured me stepping away from the crowd after the ceremony, pausing near the floral archway before disappearing down the corridor where the changing rooms were located. Then the detective tapped to pause the video. "This hallway," he said, "is covered by 2 cameras. One from the lobby side and one from the kitchen side. Both are motion activated." He played the next clip. It showed me entering the corridor with Brandon close behind. The camera picked up his tense posture, the aggressive way he walked, the sharp movement of his hand as he grabbed my wrist. It did not record audio, but even without sound, the hostility was unmistakable. I watched as he yanked me into the changing room, then the door closed and the camera view returned to static hallway emptiness. Detective Saunders said someone from staff had heard yelling around the time this footage was recorded, but by the time anyone reached the area, the noise had stopped. He asked if what the footage showed aligned with my memory. I confirmed it quietly. He nodded, then swiped to another clip. This one came from the kitchen end of the hallway. The camera captured me leaving the changing room minutes later, looking shaken and disoriented. I hesitated near the corner, glancing toward the kitchen before walking toward the busier part of the venue. The screen froze again. "Now watch closely," the detective said. He played the clip a second time, but zoomed in on the far end of the hallway. At first, I saw nothing. Then, faintly, barely visible in the dim light, I saw the edge of a shadow, a silhouette leaning slightly around the corner, the same spot where I had seen the mysterious figure earlier. My breath caught as the figure pulled back out of sight just before I turned my head in their direction. Detective Saunders paused the video. We enhanced this frame, but we still cannot identify the person. The angle is too shallow and the lighting is too low. The person was standing just beyond the range of the kitchen camera. I asked if another camera covered that direction. He exchanged a heavy look with Officer Hale. "That is the problem, Ms. Grant. There is a gap, a blind spot." He brought up the venue's floor plan. 5 cameras covered the service areas: the lobby, the main corridor, the kitchen corridor, the storage hall, the loading dock entrance. But between the kitchen corridor camera and the storage hall camera, there was a 10-foot section of wall where neither camera captured anything. It was positioned exactly where service staff often leaned carts against the wall or stepped aside when carrying heavy trays, and exactly where someone could hide without being seen. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The detective continued. "Based on timestamps, you were led toward that area shortly after leaving the changing room." "Led," I repeated slowly. That was the word he used. Detective Saunders nodded. "The cameras show you entering the service corridor at 10:14 p.m. They show a staff member walking by at 10:13. They show the last visible guest leaving the hallway at 10:12. But no one else is shown entering the hallway with you. It looks like you walked in alone. But someone was there. Someone already waiting in the blind spot." The room felt colder as I absorbed that truth. The detective swiped to another image. It showed the rear loading dock camera view. The camera faced outward, capturing the paved walkway, the dumpsters, and a dimly lit utility door leading back into the building. At 10:19 p.m., according to the footage, a waiter discovered me lying unconscious on the ground outside that door. But the camera never showed how I got there or who hit me. The detective played the clip of the waiter pushing open the door, freezing in shock, then rushing toward my body. The ambulance was called within minutes, but every second before that remained blank. Blank because the spot where I had been attacked was just out of frame, 6 feet to the left of the camera's coverage. Perfectly hidden. Perfectly timed. Not an accident. Someone had chosen that location deliberately. Someone who knew the venue's layout. Someone who knew the blind spots. I clutched the blanket covering me, fingertips digging into the fabric. The detective watched my reaction closely. He asked if I remembered anyone from the wedding who would have known the building well enough to choose that area. I shook my head. I had never been there before. He pressed gently. "What about staff members? Did any of them behave oddly?" I told him about the waiter, Jacob, spotting me near the changing room and later finding me outside, but I did not remember anything suspicious about him. Then I mentioned the shadowed figure I had seen in the hallway, the one who stepped backward into darkness. The detective's eyes sharpened. "You are certain you saw someone?" "Yes," I whispered. He leaned back slightly. "That confirms the timeline. Someone watched you after the argument. Someone followed your movements. Someone waited until you were alone." My pulse quickened. The detective folded his hands. "The blow to your head required force. Intentional force. And the location indicates premeditation. The blind spot was not large, but it was perfect for someone who wanted to act without being recorded. It is used by staff. It is used by vendors. But it is also known to anyone who attended the rehearsal dinner or walked behind the kitchen during setup. Diane, Edward, Brandon, the bridal party, the groomsmen, Lindsay's relatives. Any of them could have gone through that area, but only a few would know exactly where a camera did not point. My voice came out unsteady. "So you think the person planned it?" The detective nodded once. "Yes. Whoever hit you did not choose that spot by coincidence. They knew exactly where they would not be seen." My chest tightened painfully. Someone at the wedding had mapped out my disappearance. Someone had used the surveillance gaps to their advantage. Someone had guided me toward darkness with intention, and I still did not know who stood in that shadow watching me walk straight into the trap they set. The moments leading up to the blow were fragmented in my memory, like shards of broken glass, but as Detective Saunders pressed me gently to recall anything at all, the pieces began to arrange themselves in slow, painful clarity. I remembered leaving the hallway after seeing the shadowed figure slip away. My nerves were already frayed, and every sound around me felt amplified, every flicker of movement suspicious. I wandered toward the cocktail area, trying to blend in with the crowd and shake off the chill that had settled deep inside my bones. But no amount of soft lighting or sparkling champagne could erase the sense that someone had been watching me with intention rather than curiosity. The recollection sharpened as I forced myself to describe it aloud. I had been standing near the table of hors d'oeuvres when a young waiter approached me. He was carrying a tray of drinks and leaned in slightly so his voice would not carry over the noise. "Miss, someone asked to speak with you in the back near the kitchen." His tone had been polite matter of fact, giving me no reason to question him at first. I asked who it was, but he shrugged and said the person wanted to talk privately. The urgency in his voice had not seemed alarming then. Weddings were chaotic, and staff were constantly relaying messages. For a moment, I thought maybe the wedding planner needed help with something, or even that Diane was summoning me again to fix some imagined mistake. My stomach had tightened at that thought, but I followed the waiter anyway. He walked ahead of me toward the side hallway, his pace brisk enough that I had to take quick steps to keep up. The corridor was dim and quieter than the main area, the sounds of the reception muffled behind layers of walls and doors. When we reached the corner near the kitchen, the waiter motioned forward. "They are waiting through there." Then he hurried back toward the event floor, disappearing so quickly I barely had a moment to question it. I remembered pausing at the entrance to the staff corridor, feeling the cool air blowing from the kitchen ventilation system wash over my skin. I hesitated, staring into the long, narrow hallway, lined with metal carts, storage racks, and stacks of folded linens. A faint buzzing from the fluorescent lights overhead mingled with distant clattering from dishes being washed. The hallway felt too quiet, too still, as if something about it was holding its breath. But I forced myself to move forward, convincing myself that this was nothing more than exhaustion and nerves. I took slow steps, heels clicking lightly on the polished floor. The smell of herbs and roasted vegetables grew stronger as I approached the kitchen doors. Then, just before reaching the double doors, I heard a sharp metallic scrape. My breath caught. I took a step back instinctively. Someone was behind me. I turned my head slowly, scanning the shadows. I saw nothing at first. Then another sound, a quiet inhale, a shift of weight. Not loud, not clumsy. Controlled, deliberate. I felt my heart drop. I whispered hello too softly for confidence, too loudly for safety. No answer came, but I was no longer alone. The air was heavy with presence. My memory blurred here, but the detective encouraged me to walk through each second as it came. I remembered standing still for a moment that felt stretched thin, my instincts screaming at me to turn around and run. But something stronger than fear held me in place, a need to understand who was there and why they were hiding from sight. I took one more step forward, and that was when it happened. A blur of motion, a surge of air, a shadow stepping out from the blind spot. I did not see a face, only the silhouette of arms lifting something heavy. The world slowed. My chest tightened as adrenaline surged through my body. I opened my mouth, trying to form a word, maybe a plea or a warning or a question, but only one desperate sound escaped. "Wait!" The word barely passed my lips before the metal chair came down. The impact landed on the side of my head with such force that my vision erupted in white, then black, then a kaleidoscope of flashing shapes. Pain detonated through my skull, sharp and electric, and my knees buckled instantly. I collapsed onto the cold floor, my palms scraping against the tile as I tried to catch myself. My ears rang violently, drowning out every sound except the muffled thud of my own heartbeat. The edges of the hallway blurred into darkness, and the world spun sideways as I tried to lift my head. I could feel warm liquid pooling near my temple, not blood, but sweat from the wave of shock tearing through me. My vision warped. I saw the chair clatter onto the floor beside me. I saw a pair of shoes stepping back. Then another shape moving behind the attacker, another shadow. I remembered trying to speak again to ask for help, to understand what was happening. But the words tangled in my throat, dissolving into nothing. The hallway grew darker. My limbs felt distant, heavy, disconnected from my body. I tried to raise an arm, but it fell limply. Somewhere far away, a door opened. A gust of cold night air swept in, brushing against my cheek. The attacker stepped closer as if checking whether I was still conscious. My eyes fluttered. I could not see clearly anymore, but I felt movement. Someone crouching. Someone leaning over me. For a split second, I sensed hesitation in their posture. A pause. A silence filled with calculation rather than regret. Then, they were gone. My head throbbed as darkness pulled me under. I felt my body being dragged the rough floor scraping against the back of my dress. Then suddenly, my head hit something hard and I slipped deeper into unconsciousness. Time vanished. Sounds faded. The world became weightless. The next thing I remembered was the distant echo of someone shouting from far away, a frantic voice calling for help. A door slammed. Footsteps rushed toward me. But by then I was already slipping beneath the surface, sinking into a cold void with no sense of direction, no memory of how I had fallen. As I lay in the hospital retelling this to the detective, his expression tightened. The pattern was unmistakable. The attack had been swift-controlled and intentionally aimed at rendering me unconscious rather than injuring me by accident. Someone had waited for me in a hidden corner. Someone had known where to stand. Someone had known exactly how to strike. And worst of all, as the last fragments of memory returned, I realized something that sent a sickening chill through my body. When the attacker stepped closer, right before I blacked out, I heard them breathe. Quiet, steady, familiar, as if I had heard that breath 1,000 times before. When I opened my eyes again in the ER, the world was a blurry mosaic of white lights, muted voices, antiseptic smells, and the faint sensation of something squeezing my arm in a rhythmic pulse. For a moment, I could not remember where I was or why my throat felt raw, or why every beat of my heart echoed painfully along the side of my skull. Then the memory of the chair, the metallic swing. The crash of my body against the tile rushed back in a violent wave that made my chest tighten and my fingers curl instinctively. I blinked into the brightness overhead and saw a nurse adjusting something on the monitor. She noticed my eyes open and leaned in with a softness that felt foreign after the last few days of hostility. "Melissa, can you hear me?" I tried to nod, but the motion shot pain up the side of my neck. My voice came out cracked. "Yes." She offered a sip of water through a small straw, and I clung to it like a lifeline. The coolness on my tongue grounded me. "You are in the emergency room at Redmont General. You were brought in about 40 minutes ago. Your vitals are stabilizing, but you took a significant blow to the head. A concussion is likely, possibly some contusions on the ribs. We are running tests to confirm." Her voice faded into background noise as another presence approached. Detective Saunders stepped into my view, holding a small notepad and wearing the same concerned grimness I remembered from earlier. His partner, Detective Ramirez, followed. I suddenly felt as though I were under a spotlight exposed on a stage I had never agreed to stand on. Melissa Saunders said in a steady voice meant to be reassuring, "You are safe here. We need to ask you a few more questions if you are able." The nurse gave a small nod, granting permission. I swallowed, forcing my thoughts into some semblance of order. What happened? The question escaped me before they could ask anything. I could barely recognize the fear in my own voice. Saunders traded a glance with Ramirez. "You were found behind the banquet hall by one of the catering staff, unconscious. They said you appeared injured. Paramedics transported you immediately. No one from your family followed the ambulance." I felt something cold and hollow expand inside my chest. Not even Diane. Not even to protect her precious image. Ramirez stepped closer. "Did you have any altercation at the wedding before you disappeared?" The word altercation felt too small for the chaos I had been dragged into. I told them about the argument with Brandon, about the accusations about the BMW, about how he had tried to corner me earlier. I described Diane's constant pressure to behave perfectly and her obsessive need to control how the family appeared to the relatives gathered for the wedding. I half expected the detectives to dismiss it as family tension, something trivial compared to the violence I had endured. But instead, Ramirez scribbled quickly. Saunders asked, "Did you feel threatened by anyone during the event?" "Yes," I said, without hesitating. I felt threatened the moment Brandon grabbed my arm in the changing room and slammed a drawer open to intimidate me. and I felt watched walking through the hallway. Someone was hiding in the corridor. Someone had been waiting. Saunders leaned in, voice lowered. "Did you see their face?" I shook my head. Only a silhouette, a shadow. And then the waiter told me someone wanted to speak with me in the back. That was how I ended up in the hallway near the kitchen. Ramirez raised his brows. "We interviewed that waiter. He denies sending anyone to fetch you." My stomach dropped. If he did not send me there, then who had? I felt my pulse quicken. Saunders continued. "What do you remember in the seconds before you were struck?" I described the metallic scrape, the sharp inhale, the blur of motion, the voice I thought I heard, the breath that felt too familiar to ignore. The detectives listened without interrupting. When I finished, Saunders exhaled slowly. "Melissa, this does not appear to be a random act. Given the blind spots in the venue cameras, the timing and the placement of the attack, someone knew the layout. Someone knew exactly where you would not be seen." I closed my eyes. The memory of the swing flashed again so vividly I felt the pressure of the chair against my skull. Ramirez added, "We spoke to your mother briefly. She insisted this was an accident and that you may have slipped." My chest tightened. Of course she did. She would rather rewrite reality than admit her family had a violent problem. "What did my father say?" Saunders paused. "He said he did not see you leave the main ballroom and assumed you went home." That was a lie. He had seen me. He had walked right past me. My ribs ached with each breath. Why would he lie? Ramirez said, "That is what we are trying to figure out." Just then, the doctor arrived carrying a chart. He was mid-aged, calm, collected, but his expression held the gravity of someone about to deliver difficult information. "Miss Grant, I am Dr. Levin. The scans show a moderate concussion, some soft tissue swelling along the left side of your skull, and bruising on your ribs, consistent with either a fall or blunt force. Fortunately, no internal bleeding. You will need rest observation and someone to stay with you when you are discharged." The word, someone, felt like a cruel joke. I had no one from my family who would care. Saunders cleared his throat. "Doctor, we need to ask about the angle of impact. Could this injury be consistent with a fall onto a chair?" "No," Levin said firmly. "The force required to cause a mark like this would need to come from above, or at least from a height with velocity. This was not a stumble. Someone swung an object." My breath caught. The detectives acknowledged the doctor's words with grim nods. They turned back to me. "Melissa, we have to consider the possibility that someone in your family or someone close to them may have been involved." Diane's voice echoed in my mind like an old recording. "People judge you by how your family looks. Keep your voice down. Do not embarrass us. Image over everything, even over my life." Saunders flipped a page in his notebook. "We also spoke to a neighbor of your parents, Mrs. Rowley." My head snapped up. Why would they talk to her? She mentioned reporting prior incidents involving Brandon. She said she once saw him throw a metal trash bin at you when you were younger, and that police were called to the house several times because of shouting items breaking and your brother getting physical. I felt my stomach twist. Someone had seen me all along. Someone had known. Ramirez added, "She also said your mother refused to let her call authorities once because she did not want rumors spreading. That tracks with Diane's entire worldview. Cover-hide control." Saunders placed his notebook on the side table. "Melissa, based on the evidence so far, we are treating this as attempted assault. We are pulling additional footage from the venue, checking for fingerprints on the chair, and interviewing every staff member who was near the service hallway. We will likely need a formal statement from you once you are stable." My pulse raced. "Do you think Brandon did it?" Saunders looked at me carefully. He had motive, he had anger, and he had opportunity. But the person who struck you knew where the cameras were. They avoided them perfectly. That suggests planning, and rage alone does not mean planning. Ramirez added, "We are not ruling out any possibility, including the involvement of more than one person." My breath tightened. The idea that someone might have helped lure me there or helped cover it up made my skin crawl. Diane's obsessiveness with appearances, Edward's silence, Brandon's rage, Lindsay's uneasy glances. Any of them could have been part of this. As the weight of everything pressed down on me, the heart monitor beside me began to beat faster. The nurse returned gently, placing a hand on my wrist. "Deep breaths, Melissa. You are safe." But the word safe felt hollow. I did not feel safe anywhere near the truth that was unfolding. Saunders stepped back. "We will give you time to rest, but we will return in the morning." Before he left, he looked at me with steady determination. "Whoever did this wanted you silent. We intended to make sure your voice is heard." When they walked out, the room grew quieter but heavier. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting their seams while trying to hold myself together. 1,000 questions spiraled through my mind, none with answers. Who had swung the chair? Who had watched me fall? Who had walked back into the wedding afterward as if nothing had happened? And why did it feel increasingly certain that the attack had not been a moment of rage, but a decision, a choice, a plan? I closed my eyes as a wave of exhaustion hit me, and somewhere beneath the pain, beneath the fear, beneath the betrayal, one truth settled like a stone in water. The person who wanted to silence me was someone who knew me, someone who had been close enough to learn my patterns, someone who believed I would never fight back. They were wrong. When the detectives left my hospital room the next morning, telling me they would return once the rest of the preliminary reports came in, I felt a strange mixture of dread and clarity tightening inside my chest. For the first time since the wedding, I was stable enough to sit upright without the room spinning. The nurse brought me oatmeal and a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt charcoal, but I barely touched either. My mind was already spiraling towards something heavier than pain. Saunders had mentioned financial motives. Ramirez had asked whether my brother had access to my personal information. The questions clung to me long after they left, echoing through my thoughts with an unsettling persistence. Lying there with my phone on the bedside table, the bruises throbbing in a slow pulse, I realized I needed to check something that I had been avoiding for months. I unlocked the screen, the familiar background lighting up, showing a photo I had taken of a lake last fall. It always calmed me. It did not calm me now. I opened my banking app and immediately froze. A payment to Ridgeway BMW Financial appeared at the top of my recent transactions. My heart lurched. I had never dealt with Ridgeway personally. I had never bought a BMW, or made any payment toward one. My hand trembled as I scrolled further. 3 additional payments each for different amounts, all within the last 6 weeks. I forced my breath to slow, telling myself it had to be some glitch or some subscription I had forgotten. But the labels were unmistakable. Auto financing, dealership transfer, supplemental card fee. Supplemental card fee! The words made my mouth go dry. I tapped into the statement details and my stomach turned. A secondary user had been added to my card. The name listed was Brandon Grant. The app froze for a moment when I tapped the activity log, almost as if even the server hesitated before showing me the full horror. There were charges from a custom wrap shop, charges from a car detailing service charges from a high-end auto audio place, and then one that made my vision blur at the edges. A pre-authorization charge at Ridgeway BMW under my social security number. I whispered aloud without meaning to. No, not again. The nurse walking past my door poked her head in. "Are you all right, honey?" I forced a nod. "Just reading something stressful." She offered a sympathetic look and continued down the hall. My pulse hammered as I opened my email and typed in the search bar the name of the dealership. Several automated messages appeared. "Thank you for your inquiry. Your application is being processed. Your approval is pending." And one marked urgent received 2 days before the wedding. Please provide confirmation of the secondary user's identity and signature. Attached was a PDF. I stared at the tiny preview icon for several seconds before tapping it open. The file displayed a contract with my name typed neatly at the top. A digital signature was scrawled across the bottom, except it was not my signature. It was a warped imitation, the curvature wrong, the slant unnatural, the rhythm jagged as if forged by someone who had only seen it in passing. My throat tightened. Brandon had used my identity. He had used my social security number. He had attempted to set up a BMW under my credit because I refused to buy him one, and he had been doing it quietly, systematically, as if he believed it was his right. But the deeper I scrolled, the worse it got. I opened my credit monitoring app, something I rarely checked because I had always been responsible with money. A new account inquiry flashed red at the top. Ridgeway Automotive Group, 2 new credit checks over the past month. 1 declined, 1 pending verification, and farther down the page, something that felt like a punch to the sternum. A loan application denial from a finance company I had never heard of, dated 8 months earlier, referencing my name with an address I did not recognize. It made no sense. I had never applied for a loan of any kind. I worked, I saved, I paid my bills. That was my life. I clicked more details and saw the most damning line. Reason for denial. Excessive recent credit applications. My eyes burned. Excessive applications. Brandon. It had to be him. He knew my SSN. He had asked for it years ago when he claimed he needed it for a school financial form. I had trusted him because we were family, and he had been using that trust like a crowbar to pry open my life. I opened my texts and searched my messages with him scrolling back months. There were several vague requests. Do you still have that paperwork from last year? Can you resend me your info? Mom said you have the forms with your details. It had all seemed harmless at the time, but now with the weight of what I was uncovering, every message felt like a breadcrumb leading me toward a cliff I had never seen coming. I typed in the name of the dealership again, looking for any possible ordinary explanation. Instead, I found a call log from 2 weeks ago. 36-minute phone call, outgoing. I had never made that call. Someone had used my phone, or someone had used my saved information. A sense of violation washed through me colder and deeper than the pain in my ribs or the ache behind my eyes. This had not started at the wedding. This had been building long before. Months, possibly years. Brandon had been chipping away at my financial stability the same way he chipped away at my confidence, at my boundaries, at my sense of safety. I swallowed hard as another realization slid into place. The day before the wedding, I could not find my wallet for several hours. I remembered asking Diane whether she had seen it, and she brushed me off with a comment about how I always misplace things. And then Brandon suddenly handed it to me, saying he found it on the patio chair. I had thanked him. My stomach churned. I had thanked him while he used it to ruin me. I pressed trembling fingers against my forehead as the weight of the truth settled through me like soot. I switched apps again, opening my bank's fraud alert page. A long list of flagged transactions appeared, waiting for confirmation. All of them tied to the dealership, all of them tied to the BMW. A perfect pattern, a premeditated motive, a reason to silence me before the wedding. If I had exposed him, Diane's perfect image would have cracked. Brandon's fantasy of impressing Lindsay's wealthy family would have collapsed, and my refusal to keep playing the role they had assigned me for years meant I had become a threat. Not just inconvenient. A threat. The thought made my breath hitch. A faint knock at the door startled me, and Detective Ramirez stepped back into the room holding a folder. We received preliminary financial reports. Thought you might want to see these. I hesitated, then nodded. She set the folder on my lap. When I opened it, I felt everything inside me twist. Copies of dealership applications, screenshots of account activity, a form listing personal information that matched mine perfectly. Ramirez spoke quietly. Melissa, this is identity theft. And given the timeline and the confrontation at the wedding, it is absolutely relevant to the assault case. My throat tightened. So, you think this was connected? She nodded slowly. People do drastic things when they think someone might expose them. It fit too neatly, too precisely. Brandon's rage, Diane's obsession with appearances, Edward's silence, and then the attack. I stared at the pages in my hands. The evidence was undeniable. The betrayal was complete. And beneath it all was a question I could no longer avoid. If Brandon was willing to steal my identity, willing to drag my credit through the mud, willing to risk my future for a car he felt entitled to, then what else had he been willing to do? And had the chair swing been an act of desperation, or a plan carried out with help? A slow, burning certainty settled through me. Someone at that wedding wanted me gone. Someone wanted me silent. And now I knew exactly why. Detective Ramirez returned a few hours later, her expression sharpened with the focused intensity of someone who had spent the morning unraveling knots that no longer looked accidental. She pulled a chair next to my hospital bed, opened her notebook, and said there was someone she needed to ask me about. A member of the catering staff named Jacob Flores. My breath tightened. I remembered him vaguely from the wedding. He had been the one who brushed past me near the entrance, the one who seemed unusually alert for someone working a chaotic event. Ramirez asked, "When he approached you earlier in the evening, did anything about his behavior strike you as unusual?" I closed my eyes and tried to reassemble the fragmented memories. Jacob had looked nervous, or maybe just rushed, but he was carrying a tray and had seemed busy, hardly giving me more than a passing glance. He had mumbled something like, "Excuse me," as he hurried toward the back. He had not seemed like a threat, but neither had the waiter who sent me into the hallway, and now I knew that person did not exist. Ramirez leaned back slightly. "Jacob was the staffer who found you outside by the loading dock. According to his statement, he was taking out the trash when he noticed the door partially open and spotted a foot lying across the threshold. He called for help immediately." That part of his story matched what I vaguely remembered hearing from the detectives before. But then Ramirez's tone shifted. "But his account of the hours before that is less clear." My pulse picked up. "What do you mean?" She flipped through her notes. "Jacob said he was assigned to the kitchen rotation most of the night. When we cross-checked his statement with the venue's shift roster, something odd came up. The manager assigned him to guest service for the first half of the evening, meaning he should have been in the main ballroom, not the kitchen." I felt a prickle crawl up the back of my neck. Ramirez continued. "When we reviewed the footage, we found him near the entrance multiple times even before his shift supposedly changed. And then there is something else." She tapped her pen against her notebook. "Jacob requested to switch roles halfway through the night. He asked specifically to be moved closer to the kitchen and the back hallway area. That could be coincidence," she said, but her tone made it clear she did not believe in coincidences. My chest tightened. Why would he do that? Ramirez inhaled slowly. According to the manager, Jacob claimed he was feeling unwell after dealing with some rude guests and needed a quieter assignment. But in his written statement to us, he said he did not feel sick at all and simply wanted to help where he saw extra work. Two different versions of the same moment, neither lining up. I asked quietly, "Did he know my family? Did he know Brandon?" Ramirez shook her head. "Not directly, but there is more." She pulled out a printed sheet from her notebook and placed it gently on my lap. Photographs from Jacob's social media. Pictures taken weeks before the wedding. One in front of Ridgeway BMW. Another inside the dealership. And a third one posing beside a gleaming white BMW with a caption that made my stomach twist. "One day, I will have something like this." I felt dizzy for a moment, unsure whether it was the concussion or the implications sinking into my bones. Ramirez said Jacob did not buy the car. He simply likes taking pictures. But when we dug further, we found that he applied for a job at Ridgeway Automotive 3 months ago. He was not hired, but he would be familiar with the layout, the financing process, and how dealerships handle credit checks. My heart thudded faster. He would know how easy it was for someone to use another person's identity. Ramirez nodded. He said he worked backstage at weddings for extra income. He said he hardly noticed guests, but the manager said Jacob asked specifically about the schedule for the Grant wedding weeks in advance, something no server had ever done before. I swallowed hard. That did not make sense unless he had reason to care. Did he say why? Ramirez's eyes softened with something like apology. He said he had family friends attending that night and wanted to know whether he might recognize anyone. But we checked the guest list. No one with his last name. No one listed as family friends. I stared at her. "You think he was lying?" She nodded. We also discovered that Jacob volunteered to help set up the venue the night before, which means he was there during rehearsal dinner preparations. He would have had access to the building. He would have seen where cameras were placed. He would know the blind spots. The realization struck so sharply that I felt it behind my ribs. Someone who knew the blind spots, someone who knew finance, someone who asked about the wedding ahead of time, someone who appeared out of nowhere, disappeared, and then reappeared when it was time to find me. But that did not explain everything. Why would he attack me? Why would he care about my family's drama? I asked the question aloud. Ramirez glanced down at her notebook before answering. Jacob said something interesting when we interviewed him, something he should not have known. He claimed he saw you arguing with your brother before the ceremony. She looked up at me. That argument happened inside the changing room behind a closed door. Only someone near the door or standing in the hallway would have known details. My skin prickled. What did he say? He said Brandon was furious about money, that you refused something, that he was yelling loud enough for staff to hear. But that is not true. No staff were nearby. The hallway was empty. I felt my breath quicken. Then, how did he know? That is the question. Ramirez folded her hands. He could have been the one standing in the hallway when you saw the silhouette. My blood ran cold. That shadow, that presence watching me from the edges of the dim corridor. He had been there. Why? Ramirez said softly. We also found out Jacob was let go from Ridgeway BMW after only a few weeks as a temp because of a disciplinary issue. He was fired for accessing customer financial data without authorization. The room swayed for a moment. I steadied myself against the pillow. Accessing data, using information, knowing what SSNs were worth. I whispered, did he know Brandon? Not directly, but his cousin is married to someone from Ridgeway's service department. It is possible he overheard something or recognized your brother during the wedding when bragging about wanting a BMW. My mind reeled. Ramirez continued. Jacob insists he had nothing to do with the attack. He says he only found you. But he also knows details no one else should know. He lied about his shift. He lied about his role. He lied about knowing guests, and he was standing near the area where you were attacked. My throat tightened. So he is a suspect? Yes, but not the only one. She leaned forward. What is important is that we know someone lured you toward the back, someone else struck you, and either of them could have been working with someone in your family. Silence filled the room as the weight of that possibility settled like stone. Jacob was not the mastermind. He did not have the personal motive, but he could have been the messenger, the lookout, the accomplice, a hired hand, someone who owed a favor, or someone who simply chose the wrong side. And suddenly, every moment of that night felt sharper. The waiter who never existed, the shadow in the hallway, Jacob's too quick movements, his too convenient presence, his too detailed story. All of it threading together into a truth I was not ready to face. Someone at that wedding had not only planned my silence, they had help. The morning after Jacob's interview, I woke to a soft knock on my hospital door, the kind that sounded hesitant rather than urgent. I expected a nurse or maybe Detective Saunders returning early, but when the door slid open, the last person I expected to see stepped inside. Lindsay, the bride. Her wedding dress replaced with a pale blue sweater and jeans, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail, her makeup smudged as if she had either not slept or had been crying for hours. Her eyes widened when she saw me sitting upright. Melissa, she whispered, her voice trembling. Oh my God, I cannot believe you are awake. I stared at her, unsure what emotion to reach for. Confusion, distrust, anger. Something in her expression flickered with guilt so palpable it filled the space between us like humidity. She stepped closer but kept a few feet of distance, as if uncertain whether she was welcome. I came as soon as I heard you were conscious. I needed to see you. Needed, not wanted. The word struck me strangely. I studied her face, searching for any hint of sincerity. She twisted her hands together and looked down at her feet before speaking again. I know you probably do not want to see me, and I get that, but I have to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago. That sentence sent a cold ripple through me, but I kept my voice steady. What do you need to tell me, Lindsay? She exhaled, shakily stepped closer to the chair beside my bed, and slowly sat down. Her foot tapped nervously against the tile floor. I should start by saying I am so sorry, Melissa. I am sorry for everything you have gone through. I am sorry for not standing up for you sooner, and I am sorry for letting things get this far. Something in the wording made my pulse pick up. Letting things get this far. I felt my fingers tighten against the blanket. Lindsay looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed. I knew Brandon was using your name. I knew he was trying to buy the BMW under your credit. The world seemed to tilt, not from the concussion, but from the sudden blow of the admission. You knew. The whisper escaped me before I could stop it. She nodded, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. I found out a few weeks before the wedding. He was bragging about it to his cousin one night when he thought I was asleep. He said you owed it to him because you had a stable job and he did not. He said that you had always gotten the easier life that you needed to pay him back. Easier life. The words echoed through my chest with bitter irony. I had never felt anything about my life was easy. Lindsay wiped her eyes quickly. I confronted him about it. I told him it was wrong. I told him it was fraud, but he said he needed the car to make a good impression on my family, and that if he did not get it, he would look pathetic. He said it was your fault he was stressed and your fault he felt embarrassed. A hollow ache spread through my chest, pulsing in time with the bruise on my skull. I forced myself to ask, "Why did you not tell me?" Lindsay's voice cracked. "Because your mother begged me not to." The air in my lungs turned to ice. Diane? Of course it was Diane. Of course she had inserted herself to maintain the appearance of perfection even as chaos simmered beneath the surface. Lindsay sniffed and wiped another tear. She came to see me after I confronted Brandon. She told me that if I said anything to you, you might cause a scene at the wedding. She said you had a tendency to take things out of proportion. She said you would ruin the day, that you would embarrass Brandon. Embarrass the family. That was her word. Embarrass. My stomach twisted. Diane had been orchestrating image control long before I realized it. Lindsay continued. She told me she would handle it, that Brandon would calm down, that you would understand eventually. But he did not calm down. He was furious the entire week before the wedding. He kept saying you were selfish and cruel, that you were trying to ruin his life. She swallowed hard. I kept quiet because I did not know what else to do. I believed your mother. I trusted her. I thought she was trying to protect the wedding, protect the family. And then she looked up, her eyes filled with something that looked like self-loathing. But really, she was protecting the image, always the image. The room felt too small for the depth of the betrayal unfolding before me. I said quietly, "Lindsay, what does this have to do with the attack?" She hesitated for a long moment, her hands tightening in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. "Because I heard something the night of the rehearsal dinner. Something I did not understand at the time. Something I should have taken seriously." My pulse quickened painfully. Lindsay continued. "I was walking back from the tasting room. Your mother was in the hallway near the private dining area. She was talking to your father in that sharp whisper she uses when she is angry but trying not to raise her voice." I paused. "What did she say?" Lindsay swallowed. "She was telling him that you were being difficult, that you were going to ruin everything, that you had already disrupted too much. And then she said," Lindsay's voice shook as she forced the next words out. "She said that if you would not cooperate, you needed to be handled." The room temperature seemed to plummet. Handled. A word that in Diane's mouth had always meant controlled, silenced, overruled. But hearing it now from Lindsay's lips in the context of the wedding, in the context of me being found unconscious behind a building, made it feel darker, more literal. I struggled to breathe past the weight of the revelation. Lindsay was trembling now, unable to meet my eyes. I thought she meant emotionally. I thought she meant she wanted to talk to you, calm you down, get you to stop arguing with Brandon. But then she said something else. She said, "Edward, you know what to do. You always do." My chest constricted as the memory of the shadow behind the hallway, the second figure behind the attacker, the familiarity of the breath hit me like a physical blow. My father! Lindsay looked up again, tears streaming down her face. I do not know what she meant. I swear I do not. But after everything that happened, after hearing about the blind spot, the cameras, the attack, I cannot ignore it anymore. I needed to tell you. I had to tell you. I stared at her, the words settling into my bones with a sickening clarity. Diane had known about the fraud. She had begged Lindsay to keep me silent. She had warned Edward I was becoming a problem. She had been terrified of me exposing the truth that would stain her precious image. And now I was lying in a hospital bed with a concussion, bruises bruising the underside of my ribs, a split along my scalp, and memories of a familiar breath inches from my face as the world went dark. Lindsay covered her face with her hands. I never wanted this. I never wanted any of this. I thought I was joining a family who just cared too much about appearances. I did not know it ran deeper. I did not know someone could get hurt. I bit down hard, fighting the sudden overwhelming urge to cry. After a few seconds, I asked softly, "Lindsay, is there anything else you did not tell the police?" She hesitated, then nodded. "The night of the rehearsal dinner, I overheard your mother telling Brandon that he needed to stop provoking you because your face could bruise too easily, and she did not want the photographers asking questions. That was my breaking point. Something inside me snapped. My blood pulsed with a cold kind of clarity. A bruise was an inconvenience. My safety was an afterthought. Her image was everything. Lindsay whispered, "I should have said something earlier. I should have warned you. I should have told someone. I feel responsible." I shook my head slowly, swallowing the raw ache inside my throat. "You did not swing the chair. You did not lure me into the hallway. You did not hide in a blind spot." Lindsay whispered, "Melissa, I think someone in your family knows exactly who did. Maybe more than one of them." I stared at the wall ahead, feeling the truth settle like ice spreading across glass. Diane wanting me silenced. Edward always doing what she said, Brandon with motive and rage, and someone lurking in the shadows of a hallway. Not one suspect. Not two. Maybe a family web woven with lies, fear entitlement, and image obsession so deep that harming me felt like a viable solution. And the only thing more terrifying than that truth was realizing the attack had not been an accident or a moment of rage. It had been the fulfillment of a plan that had started long before the wedding day. Lindsay wiped her face and stood slowly. "I understand if you never forgive me. I understand if you never speak to me again. But I could not stay silent anymore. Not after what happened. Not after what I heard." I nodded slightly, my voice barely audible. "Thank you for telling me." She nodded back, then left the room with slow, heavy steps. When the door closed behind her, I let myself finally feel the full weight of her confession. Diane had not just protected an image. She had cultivated a system, one where silence was demanded, one where violence could be justified, one where I had become the enemy simply for refusing to play my part. And now the truth was cracking open piece by piece, revealing something darker than I had ever imagined my family was capable of. And I was nowhere close to the end of it. Detective Saunders returned that afternoon with a folder so thick it looked like it had been filled in haste pages sticking out at odd angles, a sign that whatever he carried inside was urgent and unfinished. He closed the door behind him and approached my bed with the slow, measured steps of someone delivering news carefully, deliberately aware of its impact before it was even spoken. "Melissa," he said quietly, "we received forensic results on the chair used in the assault." My chest tightened as a phantom echo of the blow pulsed along the side of my skull. For a moment, I could almost feel the cold metal again, the air rushing past my ear, the crack of impact. I swallowed hard and nodded for him to continue. Saunders opened the folder and pulled out several photographs. The chair looked familiar, painfully familiar, its silver metal frame slightly bent along one leg from where it had struck the floor after hitting me. He laid the photos across the tray table. "We dusted the chair for prints yesterday. We prioritized ridge detail analysis first because the surface was smooth and likely to retain clear impressions." His voice became quieter still. "We found 3 sets of prints." My pulse thudded unevenly as he pointed to the first photograph. "These are yours obviously from when the EMTs moved the chair away from you." That made sense. I nodded again, feeling a slight tremor run down my fingers. He slid that photo aside and tapped the second one. "These belong to Jacob Flores." My stomach twisted. Were the prints fresh? Yes. His were consistent with someone who handled the chair recently. We cross-referenced them with the chair stack from the loading dock where he said he had moved some items earlier. The placement of his prints matched someone lifting the chair to move it from one stack to another, not someone striking with it. The distinction mattered. A worker moving chairs would have prints on the sides. An attacker would leave prints on the top bar or the legs. Saunders continued. His prints were mostly on the sides and under the seat. No prints on the upper frame or on the areas consistent with a swing. I felt a rush of something like relief mixed with dread. Jacob had been close to the crime, suspicious, watching, but this suggested he might not have been the one swinging the chair. Saunders then slid the third photo forward. This is the print set we were most focused on. The ones with the strongest ridge detail. The ones located exactly where someone would grip if they intended to lift and strike. His tone tightened. The prints belong to your father. My breath stopped entirely. For a moment, it felt like the room constricted around me, the walls pressing inward, the air thinning. I heard the words. I understood them, but they sat in my mind like foreign objects, sharp and impossible to swallow. My father. Saunders spoke gently, but there was no softening the truth. Edward Grant's fingerprints were found on the upper rear bar of the chair, the part someone grips when lifting it overhead. No other prints overlapped them. No smudges suggesting someone else had touched that area. His prints are preserved cleanly, consistently, and repeatedly across the parts of the frame required to raise the chair for a downward strike. A tremor rippled through my chest, spreading across my ribs, making every bruise ache harder. I pressed my fingers against the blanket, grounding myself. I asked with a voice that barely formed, "Are you saying he is the one who hit me?" We cannot say with absolute certainty until we finish interviewing him again, but the physical evidence strongly suggests he handled the chair in the way an attacker would. I pressed my hand against my forehead. I had imagined 100 possibilities. Brandon, Jacob, some unknown figure, but not this. Never this. Saunders leaned forward slightly, understanding my spiraling silence. We confronted him with the preliminary results this morning. His reaction was inconsistent. Inconsistent how? He asked first if you were awake. Then he asked if you remembered anything. Then he asked if you had said anything about the argument with your brother. My heart clenched. All of those questions were about protecting the family, not about protecting me. Saunders continued. When we asked directly whether he handled any chairs that night, he denied it immediately. But the denial was too fast. And when pressed, he said he might have touched one while moving around the hallway. But the prints do not match moving. They match gripping, lifting, swinging. I felt something crack inside me, something deep and once unshakable. Saunders lowered his voice. Melissa, when someone lies to us, we look at what they are trying to hide. And right now your father is hiding something. A long, unsteady breath shuddered out of me. The memory of that moment in the hallway returned with brutal clarity. The shape behind the attacker, the second figure retreating, the familiar breath, and the way the attacker hesitated. Not with guilt, but recognition. My throat tightened painfully. Could my father have lifted the chair? Could he have planned it? Could he have been following Diane's whispered instructions? Diane saying, "You know what to do. You always do." The words replayed in my mind like a taunt. Saunders watched my reaction carefully. I want to be clear. We are not finished analyzing the prints. There may be partial smudges or overlap that could provide additional context, but what we have now is significant. I stared at the photographs of the chair, the ridges of the fingerprints highlighted in dark powder. Evidence, cold, unbiased, unavoidable. Saunders added softly, "This does not mean he acted alone. The circumstances suggest coordination. Someone had to lure you into the hallway. Someone knew the camera blind spots. Someone told him where you would be. And someone likely watched afterward." The realization twisted through me like a knife. Diane's obsession with image, Brandon's rage, my father's silence, and now this. I asked quietly, "Was there any sign he tried to remove the prints?" Saunders shook his head. "No," which means either he panicked or he thought it would not matter. Or he never expected us to test the chair so quickly. We also found a partial shoe print near where you fell. We are trying to match it to shoes worn that night. My breath felt shallow. Every piece of evidence was pulling the truth closer. Every detail was building a picture I had never wanted to see. Saunders closed the folder with finality. This is difficult, we know that, but we need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that your father was directly involved. My voice cracked as I whispered, "Why would he do this?" Saunders exhaled. People under pressure do unpredictable things. People afraid of losing control. People influenced by someone they trust. Someone like Diane. The truth hung between us like smoke. Heavy, suffocating, unavoidable. As the detective gathered his things to leave, I stared at the photo of the chair again, the prints marking my father's betrayal like scars etched onto metal. My father had held the weapon. My father had swung it. And Diane had told him exactly what needed to be done. The family that claimed to love me had nearly killed me to protect an image they valued more than my life. And now, the evidence was finally speaking the truth they had always tried to bury. The hours after learning my father's fingerprints were on the chair passed in a blur that felt more like drifting through fog than living inside my own body. I stared at the ceiling, the monitor beeping steadily beside me while the knowledge pulsed through my bloodstream like a second heartbeat. My father had been the one to lift the chair. My father had struck me. Whether he had meant to knock me unconscious or simply frighten me, the outcome was the same. And yet the question that kept looping in my mind was not why he did it, but how many people helped him. When Detective Saunders came back later to take my formal statement, something inside me had shifted. Not anger, not fear. Something colder, something steadier. Determination. He pulled a chair to my bedside and opened a new set of forms. Melissa. Before we start, I need to ask if you feel safe enough to proceed with formal charges. Safe. A hollow word when spoken in the context of family. I nodded anyway. Yes. I want to proceed. His eyes softened a fraction. All right. Then we will start with the assault charge against Edward Grant. The words felt surreal. My father's name attached to the word assault. Yet it also felt like the first step toward reclaiming something that had been taken from me long before the chair ever swung. The detective read each question clearly and patiently as I recounted every detail, every sound, every shadow, every feeling that had built into the moment of violence. He asked me to clarify the timeline, my memories of the silhouette, the familiarity of the breath, the confrontation with Brandon, the financial fraud, the lure into the hallway, the blow. When we finished, he reviewed the charges with me one by one in calm, precise terms. Felony assault, identity theft, financial fraud, conspiracy to commit assault, possible obstruction of justice depending on further evidence. My name stared back at me from the form, and beneath it the list of what had been done to me. He paused before the final signature line. Melissa, once you sign these, the process becomes formal, and it may escalate quickly. I met his gaze with a steadiness I did not expect from myself. Good, because no one else in my family ever protected me. It is time I protect myself. He nodded slowly, then handed me the pen. My hand shook as I signed the first charge, but steadied by the time I reached the last. After he collected the paperwork, he said quietly, "We will bring your father in again with these results, and your mother will be questioned further as well." I knew. Diane would unravel the second she realized the perfect image she curated for decades was crumbling. My father would either retreat into silence or lash out. Brandon would crumble under pressure the moment his self-interest collided with legal consequences. But for the first time in my life, their reactions no longer dictated mine. After Saunders left, I asked the nurse for my phone. I stared at it for several minutes before dialing my bank's fraud department. As soon as the representative picked up, I explained what had happened: unauthorized charges, identity theft, a secondary card created without my consent, multiple credit checks. The representative immediately opened a fraud case and told me they would freeze the account and investigate the dealership transactions. We will contact the dealership and verify all submitted documents. If your signature was forged, which it sounds like it was, we will remove those charges. Relief washed through me like warm water. For the first time since the wedding, something was being fixed instead of hidden. Something was being addressed instead of covered up. After the call, I contacted the credit bureau to dispute the fraudulent inquiries and place a freeze on my credit. It felt strange and empowering at the same time. I was undoing damage that had been spreading like cracks beneath a painted surface for months. Hours later, a hospital social worker visited my room to discuss safety measures and next steps. She asked if I had somewhere safe to stay after discharge. The question made my stomach sink. The answer was no. I had nowhere. I had no one. But before panic could take root, she added, "If needed, we can connect you with a temporary housing resource until you are fully recovered. It is not permanent, but it is safe and private." I nodded grateful, even though a heavy sadness pressed against my ribs. To have a safe place meant finally accepting that my family home had never been one. That evening, Detective Ramirez arrived with updates. She looked tired, as though the investigation was unraveling faster than even she expected. "Your father has denied everything," she said. But when confronted with the fingerprint analysis, his story changed 3 times. First, he said he never touched the chair. Then he said he might have picked one up earlier in the evening. Then he said he moved a chair because someone asked him to. That hesitation was telling. My heart tightened. What about my mother? Ramirez's jaw clenched. She has been evasive. Very evasive. She insisted this was all an accident, that you must have slipped, that you tend to overreact. But when we pressed her about the rehearsal dinner conversation, she denied ever saying you needed to be handled. I could almost hear Diane's voice weaving her version of reality. I never said that. She must have misunderstood. I was simply emotional about the wedding. Ramirez continued. We will issue subpoenas for venue phone records, text logs, and staff communications. We will get the truth. The thought that someone in my family might face prison did not spark satisfaction. It sparked grief. But underneath the grief, a new feeling pulsed. Resolve. When Ramirez left, I found myself staring out the window as dusk settled across the parking lot, painting everything in muted shades of violet and gray. I realized then how quiet the world felt without the constant buzz of my family's expectations, demands, and manipulations. Without Diane's voice dictating every choice. Without Brandon's accusations. Without Edward's silence. The quiet was unsettling, but it was mine. And for the first time, I let myself imagine a life where their shadows no longer dictated my every step. A life where I could breathe without shrinking myself. A life where I did not have to brace for impact. That night, lying in the dim glow of the hospital room, I made a promise to myself. I would see this through. I would tell the truth every time they tried to twist it. I would protect myself even if they never protected me. And if the path to justice was painful, lonely, or terrifying, then so be it. I had already survived their worst. The rest was up to me. The first night after they discharged me from the hospital, I lay awake in the small temporary studio apartment the social worker arranged, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic outside, sounds that felt both foreign and strangely comforting. For the first time in years, there was no voice calling my name with criticism hidden beneath politeness. No footsteps pacing the hall in frustration. No whispered arguments behind closed doors about image responsibility or my supposed failures. The silence felt like stepping into cold water, shocking at first, then slowly numbing, then finally revealing itself as something I had been starved of without ever realizing it. I moved slowly through the space, still dizzy from the concussion, my ribs aching with every breath, the bruises along my hairline tender to the slightest touch. The doctor had told me recovery would take weeks, maybe longer, depending on my stress level. I almost laughed at that. Avoid stress. As if I had ever been allowed to live a life without it. But something inside me shifted as I sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling the softness of the mattress dip under my weight. I realized that recovery did not just mean healing physically. It meant unwinding years of conditioning, of shrinking, of apologizing for existing, of filling roles my family carved out for me without ever asking who I really was. The next morning, I woke early despite the pounding in my head and forced myself through the motions of self-care. I showered slowly, careful not to let the water hit the stitches near my scalp. I dressed in soft clothes that did not pull against my bruises. I took the doctor's medication and sat at the small kitchen table with a cup of tea that trembled in my hand. Then I opened my notebook. Blank pages stared back at me, the same notebook I had carried for years, but rarely filled because Diane always said writing down your feelings only made you more dramatic. I flipped to a clean page and let the pen move each word heavy but freeing. I wrote about the chair. I wrote about Brandon's rage. I wrote about Diane's obsession with image. I wrote about the shadow in the hallway. I wrote about my father's fingerprints. I wrote about waking up alone. By the time I finished, the page was full, my hand cramped, my eyes burning. It felt like releasing a weight I had been carrying for far too long. Later that day, a therapist from the hospital's trauma support team called to schedule an appointment. When she asked what I hoped to work on, I found myself answering without hesitation. I want to learn how to feel safe in my own life. The words surprised me even as they came out. She responded gently, "That is a good place to start." For the next week, my days fell into a routine. Morning medication, quiet meals, short walks around the block when the dizziness allowed it, sessions with the therapist twice a week, and in the spaces between moments where grief, anger relief, and fear overlapped so tightly that I could hardly separate them. During one session, the therapist asked me to describe what safety meant to me. I closed my eyes and thought about it. Safety meant breathing without waiting for someone to correct me. Safety meant saying no without fearing consequences. Safety meant walking into a room without expecting conflict. Safety meant choosing my own life. The clarity of that realization hit me harder than the concussion ever had. One afternoon, I sat on the apartment's small balcony wrapped in a blanket, letting the sunlight warm my face. The bruise along my ribs flared when I shifted, but I welcomed the reminder. Pain meant I had survived. Pain meant I was still here. My phone buzzed beside me and I flinched before checking it instinctively, expecting another crisis. But it was Detective Ramirez with an update, her message brief but reassuring. "We are moving forward. We will keep you informed. You are not alone in this." I stared at the words for a long time. Not alone. I had never realized how foreign those words felt until now. That evening, I cooked a simple meal, something I had not done in months, because Diane always insisted she handle the kitchen to maintain her standards. Standing over the stove stirring pasta in a cheap pot felt strangely liberating. This small space was mine. This moment was mine. When I sat down to eat, I whispered aloud, almost shyly, "I am safe." It was the first time I had said it in years. Days passed and slowly, subtly, strength returned. My headaches became less frequent. The bruises faded from black to purple to yellow. My ribs stopped aching constantly, and the heaviness inside my chest eased enough for me to take deeper breaths. One night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, tracing the healing line along my scalp. I expected to feel weak looking at the injury, but instead I felt something else. Resilience. For so long, my family tried to convince me I was fragile, emotional, dramatic, unable to handle life without their guidance. But I had survived what they did not expect me to. I had survived their silence. I had survived their denial. I had survived their violence. And now I was learning how to live without them. On the 10th day after leaving the hospital, I woke up and the first thought in my mind was not about danger or fear or what my family might do next. It was simple. I want to keep going. Recovery was not linear. Some days, the past dragged at my heels like chains. Some nights, I woke gasping, hearing the echo of the chair's swing in my dreams. But every morning, I chose to rise. Every day, I chose myself. And that choice, more than anything else, marked the beginning of the life I was fighting for. 2 months after the hospital released me, long after the bruises had faded and the stitches were removed, and the nightmares had dulled into something quieter, my friend Marissa invited me to her wedding, a small outdoor ceremony overlooking Lake Crescent. At first, I hesitated the word wedding, still sending a tight tremor through my chest, but something inside me whispered that avoiding the world would only give my past more power. So I said yes. The morning of the ceremony, I stood in front of my closet in the studio apartment, staring at a simple navy dress Marissa had helped me pick out. It was soft, comfortable, nothing like the stiff dresses Diane always insisted I wear because they photographed better. I slipped it on and looked at myself in the mirror, surprised at how different I seemed. Not physically, though, the healing had softened the bruised shadows beneath my eyes. It was the way I held my shoulders, the way I stood without shrinking, the way I existed without waiting for criticism. When I arrived at the venue, the first thing I noticed was the laughter. Genuine, unforced bubbling through the air like music. Guests hugged warmly. Children ran between chairs. The groom adjusted his tie nervously while Marissa teased him from across the lawn. No one whispered behind manicured hands. No one glared. No one controlled the atmosphere with invisible strings of perfection. I took a seat near the back, letting the breeze brush against my skin, the smell of pine drifting from the surrounding trees. Sunlight danced on the surface of the lake, scattering bright ripples across the water. I felt my breath deepen, grounding me. When Marissa appeared at the top of the steps, wearing a simple lace gown and smiling so widely I thought her face might split, something in my chest expanded. She looked happy, not performed happy, not curated happy. Real, authentic. She walked down the aisle with her father beside her, his eyes misty and proud. The sight stirred something bittersweet in me, but not painful in the way it once would have been. Instead, it felt like acknowledging a truth I had accepted. Families could be gentle, parents could be loving, joy could be uncomplicated. As the ceremony began, I found myself smiling at moments that would have once reminded me only of what I had lost. The vows were tender and full of private jokes. The officiant stumbled over a word and everyone laughed. A toddler squealed loudly and someone scooped him up, whispering reassurances. It was messy and imperfect and beautiful. Exactly how love should be. During the reception, Marissa spotted me and ran over, grabbing my hands tightly. "You showed up," she said, eyes bright. "I'm so glad you came." I hugged her, a real hug, one that did not hide or apologize. "Of course I came," I said. "You deserve a day like this." She squeezed my hands again before being pulled away for more photos, and I watched her go with a warmth that filled me more than the sun overhead. As I wandered toward the refreshment table, the DJ played soft music, couples danced barefoot on the grass, and the scent of lavender lemonade drifted through the air. It was peaceful in a way that felt almost unreal. For a moment, my pulse quickened with old habits, expecting something to go wrong, expecting tension to rise like a storm cloud. But nothing happened. No shouting, no accusations, no flying chairs, no bruising words hidden beneath smiles. I sat at a round table beneath a lantern string, watching the glow flicker as the sun dipped lower. A quiet realization washed through me. This is what a wedding is supposed to be. A celebration of love, not a battleground. A place where people show up because they care, not because they are performing. A gathering where no one bleeds, where no one is sacrificed for someone else's image. I took a slow sip of lemonade, savoring the sweetness. Across the lawn, Marissa and her new husband shared their first dance. The crowd swayed with soft applause. For the first time in a long time, I felt my body relax fully, as if every muscle finally believed the danger was over. I felt present, safe, real. When the night deepened and the lantern sparkled against the dark sky, I whispered something to myself so quietly only the wind could carry it. I made it. Not just through the attack, not just through the investigation, but to this moment of peace, to this reminder that joy still existed despite everything that had been taken from me. I stood and walked closer to the lake, the cool air brushing against my skin. My reflection rippled on the water, but unlike before, I recognized the woman staring back. She looked bruised by life, yes, but not broken. She looked like someone who had survived, someone who was learning to live her own life for the first time, someone who was finally free. 3 weeks after Marissa's wedding, on a quiet Tuesday morning when the air outside my apartment felt crisp and clean, and I had begun to believe the worst chapters of my life were finally closing, a thin envelope appeared in my mailbox with the return address of the county detention facility. My hands went cold before I even tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper folded neatly in thirds, my name written at the top in a handwriting I had recognized since childhood. My father's. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen in the hallway, the scent of laundry detergent drifting from a neighbor's unit, the hum of distant traffic seeping through the building walls. When I finally made myself open the letter, the breath caught in my throat. Melissa, it began. I do not know how to start this except to tell you I am sorry. Not the kind of sorry your mother expects me to say, not the rehearsed phrases she always made me repeat when something went wrong. I am writing because I need you to know the truth before the court tells it for me. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, the paper trembling in my hands. His words continued in sharp, uneven lines. I did what I did because I was weak. Because for too long I let your mother dictate every part of our lives. I let her decide what was right, what was wrong, what was acceptable, what should be hidden, who deserved protection and who deserved silence. I let her convince me that our family's image mattered more than our children's safety. It is not an excuse. It is just the truth. You were never the problem. We were. A lump formed in my throat, heavy and painful. He went on. When your mother said you needed to be handled, I did not think she meant hurt. I thought she meant guided, calmed, brought back into line. But when I saw you that night walking toward the hallway, crying and angry and shaking, something in me snapped. I thought you were going to expose everything. I thought our family was going to fall apart in front of the entire guest list. I thought I needed to protect us. Instead, I hurt the only person who never deserved it. I closed my eyes, the words blurring behind a sudden burn of tears. He wrote about Diane next, almost fearfully. Your mother is still telling the investigators she had nothing to do with anything. She wants me to take the blame. But she knew. She knew Brandon was using your name. She knew the dealership would call you eventually. She knew you were going to tell the truth. And she cared more about what the Harpers thought than what you suffered. If I could turn back time, I would walk out of that hallway. I would tell you everything. I would protect you the way a father should. But I cannot change what I did. I can only tell the truth now. My hands tightened around the letter. His voice echoed through my mind, not the soft voice I remembered from when I was little, but the hollow one he used in the years after Diane took over every part of our lives. The next lines were written slower, the ink slightly darker where his pen must have pressed harder against the page. The truth is, Melissa, you are stronger than all of us. You always were. And we resented you for it. Because you were the only one who did not bend, the only one who questioned your mother, the only one who refused to live a life built on fear and image. We punished you for your light because we were too afraid to face our own shadows. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. He ended his letter with words I never imagined hearing from him. I know you may never forgive me, and I will not ask you to, but I want you to know this. You did nothing wrong. You were never the burden she said you were. You were the truth in a family built on lies, and I am grateful you survived what we tried to silence. Live your life, Melissa. Live it loudly. I folded the letter slowly, my fingers trembling, each crease feeling like closing a chapter I had waited years to end. I placed it back in the envelope, letting out a breath I felt like I had been holding since childhood. I walked to the balcony and let the sunlight warm my face as I stared at the mountains in the distance. For the first time in years, the future did not feel like a threat. It felt like possibility. My father's apology did not erase the pain or the betrayal. It did not heal the scars or undo the violence. But it acknowledged the truth. And in acknowledging it, something inside me finally unclenched. I whispered into the wind, barely audible, I am done carrying your mistakes. The breeze lifted softly, almost like an answer. I thought of my mother clinging desperately to the version of herself she had crafted, terrified of the truth unraveling her carefully built world. I thought of Brandon facing charges he never believed he would face because entitlement had always shielded him. I thought of myself standing on the other side of a life I no longer wanted or owed anyone. And then I thought of the last line I wrote in my notebook days earlier, the one that had become my quiet promise. Family is not who shares your blood. It is who does not hurt you to protect their own image. With the letter folded beside me and the sky stretching wide and clear above, I finally believed it. And I finally believed I deserved better. If you made it all the way to the end of my story, thank you from the bottom of my heart because it means something in this journey resonated with you, whether it was the pain, the betrayal, the quiet moments of healing, or the long road toward reclaiming a life that was almost taken from me. I know so many of you out there have walked paths that no one else ever saw, carried burdens in silence, and survived things you never thought you would. And if my story reminded you even for a moment that your voice matters, then I hope you will stay with me as we continue building this community together, a place where truth is honored, where survival is recognized, and where healing is not only possible, but welcomed. If this story moved you even a little, please take a second to like this video because it helps more people who might be going through something similar find the strength they need. And if you have ever witnessed or lived through toxic family dynamics, emotional manipulation, or violence hidden behind closed doors, share your thoughts in the comments below because you never know who your words might help feel less alone tonight. And if you want more stories like this, real stories about strength rising from the darkest places, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter, because every week we dive into another journey of resilience, justice, truth, and the quiet triumphs that happen long after the world stops watching. If you are someone who has ever been told to stay quiet, to behave, to shrink, to keep the peace at the cost of your own well-being, let this be your reminder that your safety, your life, and your future matter far more than anyone's reputation or anyone's expectations. And if you are watching this from a place of hurt, wondering whether things will ever get better, I hope you take this moment to breathe deeply and know that healing is not linear. Justice is not always fast, and freedom does not always look the way we imagine, but you deserve all of it. You deserve peace. You deserve protection. You deserve to tell your story without fear. And if this video was the push you needed to take that first step, whether it is calling a friend, reaching out for support, or simply believing your own feelings for the first time in a long time, then I hope you hold on to that moment and follow it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting this channel, and thank you for sharing your strength in the comments. Your presence here keeps this space alive. Until the next story, take care of yourself, stay safe, and never let anyone silence the truth you carry.